Okay, good morning. I will open the record now in the matter of the petition for early termination of probation of Angie Maez. Yes. Okay.
Before we go on the record, may I mention what I think is a housekeeping matter?
Okay.
I received a set of exhibits numbers 1 through 8 from the Deputy AG on this case, and we don't have any objection to the board considering those exhibits. However, additionally, we received what appears to be a probation file from the probation division. And that contains 1, 2 exhibits A through H, which are a lot of details about the process of probation. It contains, for example, prescriptions that the licensee submitted to the board to show the medications that she was testing positive for were prescribed, and also copies of the actual test results along the way. They're not part of the exhibits, but I don't know what, I just want to find out whether the board has a set of that file.
So,
The file itself.
okay. Ms. Reyes, do you want to address that? Or
Your Honor, the exhibits that were put together are the exhibits that were submitted by the petitioner as her petition packet. There was additional documents that are produced as, with regard to my responsibility to produce discovery, but I don't have any awareness as to whether or not the board has these documents, and I believe counsel is responsible for putting together any additional exhibits he may have felt the board should consider. And I've not received anything indicating that there was additional documents.
So you're planning on putting in just exhibits 1 through 8?
Exactly, yes, Your Honor.
So I assume that the board had copies of the full probation file. If not, if you refer to any of those, then we would reserve the right to produce parts of the file as actual exhibits, which I believe we received from the board originally. I just want to be clear on what the state of the evidence is at this point.
Okay, so my understanding is we'll be taking in the exhibits that Ms. Reyes presents and any exhibits that you present, and I don't believe the board will be considering any other documents.
It would be helpful if we had copies of
But
documents.
if you're going to refer to them, right. But the board doesn't bring in the probation file or any other documents. So,
unless it's included in the packet.
Exactly. So only the documents that are identified during the hearing are coming into the closed session. So that means any documents that were in that probation file that you want to address, you'll need to put into the record.
We'll do that. Though, based on the information I now have, it appears that we'll have to make copies.
Okay. So if there's any excerpts in there, portions of that that you want to offer in, we'll have to make arrangements to copy them. But does that clarify that that's?
Yes.
Okay, great. And we're good to. If something weird happens. Okay, so let's hope. You're good to go. Okay. Okay, so we're now on the record in the matter of the petition for early termination of probation of Angie Maez. This case bears Office of Administrative Hearings, case number 2018-070204. My name is Karen Reichman. I am an administrative law judge from the Office of Administrative Hearings, and I have been assigned to sit with the Board of Psychology today, which has convened to consider this petition. I would like to take appearances for the record, please.
Good morning. Brenda Reyes, Deputy Attorney General for the
Thank you.
Good morning, Your Honor. Alan Kaplan on behalf of the licensing and petitioner, Angelita Maez.
Okay, and let the record reflect that Dr. Maez is present at this hearing. Ms. Reyes, would you like to present the jurisdictional exhibits?
Yes, thank you. There is a packet. In fact, when I present the original exhibits to the board.
Please turn your microphone on.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Yes, I am asking Mr. Gardner to please present the original exhibits to the board, and I will identify the jurisdictional documents. At Exhibit 1 is Dr. Maez's petition for early termination of probation, and I will identify the various parts to it. At A is the petition for early termination of probation. B is the disciplinary action information sheet. These are documents that are submitted by the petitioner in support of the petition itself. At Exhibit C is the evidence of rehabilitation sheet. At Exhibit D is a release and a letter from the Santa Barbara Behavioral Health and the Therapy information sheet. At Exhibit E is the request for an accommodation, a professional evaluation and documentation of disability, and an ADHD evaluation. At Exhibit F are certificates of Dr. Maez's continuing medical education. And at Exhibit G are peer statements regarding Dr. Maez's suitability for probation modification, and in particular, those letters are from, excuse me a moment, a Tanya, let me spell that, Tanja, last name appears to be Rentiman, R-E-N-T, Rudiman, R-E-O-U-T-I-M-A-N-N, and the second letter is from Dr. Harvey, H-A-R-V-E-Y, Presser, P-R-E-S-S-E-R. At Exhibit 2 is the certificate of licensure with regard to Dr. Maez's licensure with the Board of Psychology. At Exhibit 3 is the notice of hearing. In addition, at Exhibit 4 is the Board of Psychology probation report with regard to Dr. Maez's compliance to date with probation. At Exhibit 5 is the psychological evaluation of Dr. Maez that was conducted as part of the probation requirements. At Exhibit 6 is the decision and order in the underlying matter with regard to Dr. Maez, Board of Psychology case number 1F 2012-226-634. And at Exhibit 7 is a citation and order of abatement issued by the Board of Psychology against Dr. Maez in April of 2018. And at Exhibit 8 is a second citation and order of abatement issued to Dr. Maez in June of 2018. And just for the record, I'd like to say at this point, I do have a request for protective order sealing, in particular, the confidential records that are at Exhibits 1D, 1E, and 5. I have provided a copy to counsel, and I do also have a copy of a proposed order for the administrative law judge's consideration, and I can submit these at the end of this particular hearing.
Okay. So, Mr. Kaplan, do you have any objections to Exhibits 1 through 8?
None, Your Honor.
Okay. And then do you have any objection to the proposed protective order?
We do not.
Okay. So Exhibits 1 through 8 are admitted, and portion of Exhibit 1, D and E, will be subject to the protective order, as will Exhibit number 5. And Ms. Reyes, I did want to ask you about, in Exhibit 1, in the petition, some of the responses are cut off.
What I represent is that I noticed that at the same time as I was preparing this packet, and we obtained from Dr. Maez the document at page 005, which is the addendum to the explanation I think you're referring to, which is the question 1 at page 4.
Okay.
I don't see that page cut off in order.
The sentence not completed at page 4. Question number 1, describe the events that led to the discipline.
Yes.
And so Dr. Mais submitted this addendum to question 1, which is she represented as of the remainder of that portion that appeared to get cut off.
I see.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Ms. Reyes, do you want to make any opening remarks?
No, Your Honor.
Okay. Mr. Kaplan, it's now your opportunity to put on evidence and argument on behalf of the petitioner.
Thank you very much, Your Honor. First, I'd like to address some questions to Dr. Maez.
Okay. Then let me administer the oath. Dr. Maez, will you please stand and raise your hand? Do you solemnly swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that your testimony in this proceeding will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? I do. Thank you very much. And please be seated and just state your name for the record.
Dr. Angie Maez.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Kaplan.
Are you also known as Angelita Maez?
Yes.
Dr. Maez, first I'd like to ask you some questions regarding the underlying history of this matter.
Sir, sorry to bother you. If you put your face that way, we're not getting any audio. So.
The underlying history of this matter. I think in the you've actually discussed these items with Dr. Adrian, and they're listed in her report. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Is that a yes?
Yes.
Okay. All right. In the 1990s, did you have a relationship with a man that was problematic to you?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Okay, that's yours.
And when did that relationship end?
About 1998.
Okay. At the time of the ending of that relationship, did any physical violence take place?
Yes.
Was that against you?
Yes.
Do you feel that you were able to effectively manage the relationship with this person and protect yourself from harm?
Well, I really didn't feel I was in harm. I knew that was controlling, and I had already mentally began to distance and withdraw. And it was at that time that I think he sensed it, and he sent me to the emergency room.
Because he beat you up?
Yes.
Okay. Did you have, in your view, adequate psychological support at that time to assist you with dealing with this relationship?
No, I think that when I started to realize that I was in denial, I guess, about the extent of my distress, I just figured distancing and leaving would be okay. So I think I just didn't catch getting psychological treatment at the time. I just was toughing it out.
Did you, as a result of your inability to deal with this relationship, have any encounters with law enforcement in the 1990s?
Yes.
What do you recall about that?
I think I got a DUI.
Did you feel that you were abusing substances at that time?
Yes. Yes.
I'm just going to object. It's vague and ambiguous as to time right now.
When did you get the DUI?
Okay. The things that I'm not sure what you're talking about exactly, because the things that were brought to the attention of the board I explained in detail responding to those, And all of those seemed to be around the time when I was in an abusive relationship and I was leaving the relationship, and then I just started using drugs and alcohol.
Do you feel in retrospect that there would have been a better way for you to deal with the difficulties in their relationship?
Yes, absolutely. When I finally had a physical assault and I went to the battered women's shelter, had to have reconstructive surgery, I was in therapy briefly at that time.
Was that in the late 1990s?
Yes.
Following that, did your mother fall ill with Alzheimer's disease?
Yes.
At the time she fell ill, was she living in California or somewhere else?
No, she was born and raised in Alamogordo, New Mexico.
Did you do anything to help her?
At the time, I had a private Medi-Cal contract. I was able to go back several times a year, and I started to get worried. She was slowly diminishing in her cognitive.
Did that have an effect on you psychologically?
Yes.
What effect?
Well, I started worrying about her, and I had to bring her over to live with me in Santa Barbara in a one-bedroom apartment.
Did it cause you any psychological difficulties, and did you obtain treatment for those at the time?
No.
Did it cause you any psychological difficulties?
Yes. I was pretty overwhelmed with, well, just the unpredictability of someone with dementia and losing track of her. I mean, I couldn't take her anywhere. We would go like to Kmart or something, and the next thing I know, she'd be running off and talking to strangers and children, and it was just a constant state of anticipatory anxiety. So,
did you give her 24-hour care?
Yes, I did.
In your home?
Yes.
Okay. Did she elope from your home sometimes?
Yes.
Did this situation of rendering 24-hour care to your mother and the eloping cause you any psychological difficulties?
Yes, I was always anxious. I was pretty anxious. I was working full-time in Ventura County, and so I had the caretaker caring for her when I was absent. So it was always a 24-hour awareness of a responsibility.
Did you react in some way to the stress caused by caring for your mom?
Well, eventually she diminished enough in her capacity to be able to be the standard medical practice for this is 24-hour locked facility. So when she was diminished in her capacity enough to transport her to that care, that happened in 2006. It was after that I just, I had time to myself, but I was still very stressed, and I felt, I think, really guilty that I had to institutionalize my mom. And
was there any connection between that and any substance abuse problem for yourself?
I think so.
What was the connection?
Drinking.
What was the connection?
The connection?
Yes.
I think a lot of feelings of depression, anxiety, guilt. I'd always done things on my own. I was pretty strong, and I know I was smart, but it was hard for me to ask for help, to depend on others. I was pretty self-sufficient, and so I think I was in denial. I think I internalized the feeling that I couldn't do it. And it's a really hard task to take care of someone with Alzheimer's.
Did you have a DUI in 2010?
Yes, I did.
Okay. At that time, were you experiencing any psychological difficulties as a result of the situation with your mother?
Yes, I had to fly to Alamogordo, 5 and 6 times a year, and so it was always seeing her in a more diminished, cognitive development. She wasn't even present anymore. So that would cause me a lot of distress.
And did your mother pass away at some point?
Yes.
What year was that?
2014.
In the context of the probation that you underwent in this case, did you have psychological care or psychiatric care, or both?
I did. I wasn't mandated. I just I went ahead and I went to therapy, and I'm still going to therapy.
Okay. Did you also have medication
Yes.
from a licensed psychiatrist?
Yes.
Who was that?
Dr. Michael Ferguson.
Okay. And
He works
also-
in conjunction with my therapist.
And his letters, was there a letter from him provided to the board in connection with this petition, or a form?
Well, what had happened was, his office didn't. Yes, there should be a letter in there.
Did you also have psychotherapy from someone?
Yes,
And who was that?
Rob Bannister, MFT.
And did Mr. Bannister's work with you help?
Yes, tremendously.
Did you gain any insight concerning the reasons you got into trouble with the law and with the Board of Psychology in the past?
Yes, I realize that I have this tendency to try to do things all alone. Like there's some sort of shame in trying to reach out when I needed it. And so it's been extremely helpful to have to discuss, the weekly activities. Every time I'm there and we're talking about how things are, I work for the California State Department of Rehabilitation. So I have several different branch offices to deal with, so it's several different personalities, many personalities in a given week. So it's a little challenging. So it's nice to be able to bounce it off of, is this an Angie thing again, or is that their thing? It's just a work-related thing. So it's nice to have feedback about how I am coping, how I'm perceiving, distressing interactions with rehab counselors, administration, and a government agency.
What are your duties in the department that you work for?
I do comprehensive psychological evaluations or psychoeducational evaluations, depending on what the consumer is needing. I help the State Department establish eligibility for services for the disabled. And that could be anywhere from neuropsychological to post-stroke to learning disabilities, emotional problems, parolees, drug problems.
Do you do any psychotherapy?
No, I do have interns. I did have interns from Antioch University, postdoctoral, predoctoral and postdoctoral, and I do consultations either telephonically or in person with
But you don't do psychotherapy?
No, I don't
as
do
part of your work.
psychotherapy at this time.
How long has it been since you've done psychotherapy?
About 2010, in June 2010, the Medi-Cal changed completely, and so the contracts were voided for individual providers. So I was just doing competency hearings for parental competency, juvenile delinquents. I had a contract with Ventura County and Santa Barbara County.
Now, Exhibit 4 before the board is a probation report, and I think on page 5 they list violations of probation. One of them that was listed was the passage of the CPLE exam.
Oh.
I'd like to ask you about that. Have you done well in school before this?
Yes.
And in fact, there's, I think, a report in the board materials from someone on what they call a ADHD analysis, where they do
He
some
was one
kind
of our vendors, yeah.
Okay. And you underwent an evaluation?
Yes.
Okay. Why, in your view, did you not pass this CPLE exam on 2 occasions?
I had 2 occasions before I would expire the amount of the first 30 days. And one of my probation mandates did not require me to tell my boss that I was on probationary status.
Do you understand my question?
I don't know.
Why do you
Repeat it.
believe you did not pass the test?
I
on two
think I was
occasions?
over anxious, and again didn't get the psychological help that I needed to, address those feelings of overwhelming anxiety. I knew I only had 2 times to be able to take it, and I had never ever flunked anything in my life, so it was like just a shock. But I think.
So after those 2 times that you failed to pass the exam, did you request a leave of absence from your
Yes.
department
Yes.
where you worked?
Yes.
Was it common for them to grant a leave of absence?
No, it's the union guy said that it was very, very rare that a state government agency would give you the option to take a leave of absence or a non-punitive
And
termination.
how long of a leave of absence did you obtain?
3 to 6 months.
Okay.
So I did it in 2.5 months.
During that time, did you receive psychotherapy
Yes,
and
that-
also psychiatric support?
Yes,
And
that's when I
do
started.
you feel that that helped you with your anxiety issues so you could successfully pass the exam on May 22nd, 2017?
I didn't do that until after I passed the exam. I went through all that, having to take care of my mom, getting a really good job with the state, and getting an allegation, and it was just all too much. I looked at it like my whole livelihood was in threat. I mean, obviously.
Did you receive anti-anxiety medication?
Can I interfere, Your Honor? I'm sorry. I feel like counsel and the witness continue to talk over one another, and I think counsel is cutting the witness off. May I ask for some instruction regarding the testimony?
I
I'm
don't-
wondering about the court reporter as well, whether she's able to get this with the.
She'll let me know.
Thank you, Your Honor. Was there any anti-anxiety medication that you took during the period when you were preparing for the third taking of the exam?
No.
Did you take anti-anxiety medication to assist with the anxiety that you were suffering from that had something to do with your difficulty with the exam?
No.
Have you taken anti-anxiety medication at some point?
After I passed the exam and returned to work, I went to therapy, and I asked for a referral to a psychiatrist for antidepressant medication. So I was on antidepressant medication and anxiety as needed and sleep medication as needed.
Did you provide copies of all prescriptions that you received from your psychiatrist to the board?
Yes, I did.
And this was in connection with the continuing substance testing that you were undergoing?
Yes, it was daily call-in.
Why do you believe that you passed the exam on your third attempt?
Because I had plenty of time to just relax, get out of that hamster wheel, I guess, of feeling anxiety and overwhelmed and perceiving the threat of a livelihood gone down the tubes, but that was diminishing. I was able to be more reality-checking, more reality-based at that time about what it actually means. If you pass, you pass. If you don't, you don't. So it was like a whole different feeling.
Okay, again, on page 5 of exhibit number 4, it is mentioned that you did not check in with First Source Solutions for biological fluid testing on January 13, 2018.
Yes.
Following that, did you have some communication with your probation officer?
Yes.
Who was that?
Curtis Gardner.
Okay. And what did you discuss with Mr. Gardner?
About a month after that showed as a deficiency in my compliance, I got a call from him, and I was surprised. I was shocked.
What did you discuss with him?
A plan to recall, to be able to remember. Can I say something?
Well, you had a problem remembering. And what is the reason that you did not check in with First Source Solutions in January
forgot.
2018? You forgot?
I forgot.
Did you tell Mr. Gardner this?
Yes.
Did he make a recommendation to you about something you could do with a telephone so you wouldn't forget?
Well, I just always had my telephone. He asked me what my plan is, and I said I don't even know how I could have forgotten, because I always keep my phone right next to my bed. It's like the first regimented activity I do every day. My whole life was regimented around complying with daily calls, complying with AA meetings.
So you had to call every single day
Yes.
to the First Source Solutions, and
Right.
you missed one day.
Yeah.
So you had to call every single day to First Source Solutions, and you missed January 13.
Yes.
Did you ever test positive for controlled substances in the entire time you were on probation?
Not that weren't already told to the state via copies of the prescriptions.
Okay. Nothing that was not
Nothing illicit.
illicit. Okay. And then there's a mention here that April 16 and April 23, 2018, you also did not check in with First Source Solutions.
Yes.
Did you discuss that with Mr. Gardner?
Yes, I did. Much to my distress, I had forgotten again. So
All right. Why do you believe you forgot?
I don't know. I mean, every day since October 2017, of 2016, I was every day. I don't know why.
Okay.
I don't know why.
Did you discuss with Mr. Gardner an enhanced plan so you would no longer forget?
Yes,
What plan did you discuss with Mr. Gardner?
I made a big poster the entire size of the door to my bedroom. Urine test.
And where did you put the poster?
Right on the door of my bedroom.
Did the
the
poster
first thing
work?
Yes, it
even
did.
though the phone did not?
Yes.
So you haven't missed a call-in since then?
No.
Okay. And you have not tested positive for any improper substances since then, correct?
Correct.
In addition to supplying prescriptions to Mr. Gardner, did you also attend 12-step meetings?
Yes.
Do you still attend those meetings?
Yes.
And you submitted signed proof of that to the board
Correct.
in your probation file?
Correct.
Okay. And you also submitted all prescriptions that you had
Yes.
for controlled substances?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And you've also paid your for the fines that you were that were exacted on you, as well as your probation costs?
Yes.
Okay. Have you gained any insight as to why you forgot to check in with First Source Solutions on 3 occasions?
No, I don't. I just simply forgot. I knew that. I have no idea why. It made no sense, because every day you call, and so the day before or the day after would have also been a call. So even though it might have seemed sneaky, it wouldn't have been, because you test the day before. If you forget a call, then the next day. I don't know if it was a function of, I knew I was able for a whole year before today, well, since October of last year, I was eligible for early termination. So I didn't mean to slack off, but I think that it might have been a function of that, just knowing that, we're getting to the other side. But compliance had never been a problem to me. No drinking, no drugs, no.
Do you believe that you've completely overcome your problems with dealing with this need to be in control all the time and not to get help, or do you feel?
Oh, yes.
Are you currently in therapy?
Yes.
Do you have a plan to stay in therapy?
Yes, I do.
Have you had any encounters with law enforcement since the 2010 DUI
No.
event?
No.
Okay, nothing further.
12 step.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Kaplan. Ms. Race.
Thank you. Now, Dr. Mais, your discipline in this case arose from the fact that you pleaded guilty to a reckless driving that was Thank you. Dr. Mais, your discipline arose from the fact that you had a conviction for reckless driving that was
Right.
alcohol-related. Is that
Yes.
correct? And that was in 2010?
Yes, exactly.
Okay, and the accusation in your case also alleged a prior conviction for a DUI in 2003, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now, I'd like to refer to your disciplinary action sheet, information sheet, which is at page 4 of the exhibits. It's in Exhibit 1. And the page numbers are on the bottom right corner of all the documents.
So to bother you, if you can put this one.
Where's that pamphlet? Where's that pamphlet? It's not. There's like, the rest of that isn't in there.
Okay, do you have that page, Doctor?
Oh, right, okay. Yes.
Okay. Now, that first question asks you, describe the events that led to your discipline, correct? Now, you begin by referencing in the late 1990s that you suffered physical assault, and you've described those, some of those events.
Right.
What I'd like to ask you, with regard to this description, you go through a history, which you just did under your direct examination of going to a battered woman's shelter and all this. I would like to ask you, since this question asks you to describe the events that led to your discipline, how does this relate to your conviction in 2010?
I think I probably should have added more information specifically to answer the
You can
question.
answer that question. Can you put the microphone
Here?
now? Let me adjust it for you.
Okay. Gosh, it doesn't seem like I directly answered it. Okay, to describe the events that led to the discipline was that I was driving on the 101, and I came to a pass where there's two very long merging entries. It's an exit and then a very long merging entry. And then right following that one is another merging on to the next exit. So it's a very unusual set of events. So if you're not 100% alert, you have to make sure that not only are you driving, but you're cognizant of the fact that someone's merging really slowly. I explained to, which of course becomes worse than if you're impaired. I explained to Mr. Kaplan that everyone that lives in the Santa Barbara community knows that really long runway and then another runway and then a quick exit. And so he goes, do the traffic studies. So
Do you understand the question? She asked whether anything you wrote here relates to
no,
the...
it doesn't.
Okay, just answer the question.
Okay.
Okay. So I think the board is not so much interested in the particulars of the incident itself other than as it relates to your physical, perhaps, and mental state as to how you got yourself into that situation. I think that's what the board would like to hear, not the road conditions,
Okay.
but your mental state and how you found yourself in that situation.
Well, I think, in June 10, in June is the end of the fiscal year, and July 1 is the beginning of the new fiscal year. I got some really bad news. I had a major contract with Early Prevention, EPSDT, and First Five. I mean, I was making plenty of money and doing a lot of good work, and I had about 5 MFT interns. And then it was announced, they give you plenty of lead time that, wow, it's all pulled out from under you. They were no longer going to, the state budget was in a crisis, and that was the first to go. Individual providers of Medi-Cal contracts were no longer the thing. So, I still had contracts with Ventura Superior Court, the DA's office in Santa Barbara, and Santa Barbara Court, but that's like here and there. So I was like, and I think I just was really bummed out. I think that's what led me to drink and not Uber.
Okay, so you think you were going through some difficulty,
Yes.
financial difficulties. Okay, and are you saying that your judgment was therefore impaired, and that's
Well,
what
I was
caused-
depressed.
Please let me finish the question.
Okay.
Are you saying that your judgment was impaired at or about that time, and that caused you to therefore drink and drive?
I was feeling depressed, so yes.
Okay. Question 2, I'm just wondering what ACT is. It's that same page.
Oh, acceptance. It's a form of behavioral therapy.
Okay. Now we're looking at page 6 of your disciplinary action information sheet. The question at the top of this page asks you, how do you think that your actions, inactions, or issues that led to your discipline may have affected patients and or family members? Again, I'm not seeing how this response addresses the question. You said you didn't see patients during a very difficult time in your life because it would have been unethical. What is the timeline that you're referring to here?
I think the time in the year late 2002 when I had Mom in 2003, and then beginning in June of 2010 when I was no longer seeing clients.
But the question is asking you about your conduct that got you onto discipline. So were you actually treating patients in 2010?
Not anymore. The contracts were taken away.
Okay. With regard to your comments on the evidence of rehabilitation information sheet, which is at page 7.
Where's that?
The documents are all paginated at the bottom right-hand corner. So it's AGO 007.
All right. Mm-hmm.
So I'm looking at question 2 on that page and asked whether or not you've sought therapy, and you indicated yes. And then you're asked what insight you've gained from the experience. And you indicate that you've improved your coping skills and researched your reaching out for an emotional support. Can you explain to us what exactly are you referring to? What have you done to improve your coping skills, and how would you describe them as improved?
Well, I work with my circle of friends are either PhDs or MFTs or bilingual, bicultural therapists, and we share and we do like coffee once a month type of thing. But I also started to become really invested in the AA, in the 12-step. I've had to go for a very long time now and when I was working dual diagnosis at UCSB, I was doing the research. I was a treater on a research, and longitudinal study and research. And I've always firmly believed that as an ancillary to regular therapy, 12-step programs are absolutely the way to go. It's not just therapy alone. It has to really be both. So, again, it was an insight I came to, was like, see what you see. Now, you're forced to do this, but it is extremely helpful. It is a huge group. I've become part of the fellowship, and it's a good social outlet, but it's also hearing and not in a patient therapist role, dyad, but in a participatory way, how important 12-step could be. I mean, it was like it's an anchor. And so stemming from that, the social aspect of it started to make me not be so isolative. Having had to take care of my mom, and, I was really starting to be a homebody. And so since I work with so many people during the week, it's almost like you get peopled out. And so now I'm really embracing that I have all these people around me that are rehab therapists or psychologists, and that's really helpful. I formed some really good relationships, personal relationships.
Can you tell us, Doctor, when did you last drink?
Probably that 2010, and before that it had been many years.
Okay, so you haven't had a drink of alcohol since that time?
Right.
Okay. Now, going back to page 6, and referring to question number 7 that asks you, what assurances can you provide to the Board of Psychology that you will not reoffend? And you certainly describe the effects on you of this, but what I don't see really addressed here is the basis for which you came onto probation, which was alcohol consumption.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I understand that you are in AA now.
Right.
Okay. So can you describe how that has in any way changed your behavior and your approach with regard to drinking?
Well, on the second paragraph, it emphasizes that, I've been licensed since 1991, and I got a PhD at UCLA, and those were all benefits and blessings that I got. And then to have the situation come up, I was shocked at my carelessness with having a license and just drinking and driving and such. And so I fully intend to continue on with what I'm doing now. I'm in therapy. I have been abstinent even before then, the few years before 2010. I was really enjoying a very good state contract and very, very good reputation in 3 counties. So I jeopardized that, and so and I realized that turning to alcohol was again like putting my head in the sand, not really addressing what was going on, self-medicating, and not asking for help when I needed it. So that's why now it would just seem so far-fetched that I would do anything like that.
Do you have a sponsor in AA?
No.
Okay. Is there any reason why you do not?
Well, Rob Bannister is my MFT, and he actually is the director of the Wellness Center at Sansom, Santa Barbara Centers. I had seen him previously, and so I'm seeing him again. So I attend a group meeting that's a speaker meeting. So I haven't really felt the need to do that because I'm not, at this time I really don't feel I'm at risk to offend. if I do feel that I would be, then I absolutely would get a sponsor.
Well, but what do you have a plan in place, though, should the occasion arise where you, as you say, you do feel tempted? So if you are saying you would get a sponsor, that wouldn't address the situation if you were... please let me finish my question.
Okay.
That would not address the situation if you came upon a situation where you were tempted. So my question is, what plan do you have, if any, for addressing a situation that may arise where you do feel the temptation to drink or to in any way abuse a substance of any other kind?
Well, it's been since 2010 that I haven't had the feeling to want to drink. I've experienced a lot of stress, a lot of depression, a lot of sleep disturbance, and then when this came along and we made the decision, the final decision, I was just glad to have that pressure off of me. But I didn't once, under all that, what was at stake to me, losing my license, did I ever feel tempted to drink. I resumed attending a Christian church I was doing. I was running Celebrate Recovery for them as a community-sponsored event, a church-related event. And then I just was very able to resume my job when I got the job. This is a very good job.
Okay. I'd like to go through the terms of your probation and address your compliance. So referring to the probation report that summarizes the terms, I'm looking at Exhibit 4.
Okay.
And one of the conditions was that you submit to psychological evaluation. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
Okay, and you did submit to that, and that
Right.
was conducted by Dr. Sherry Adrian. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, and that was completed back in. She has the date of her evaluation as November of 2017, but was it actually in 2016? Do you recall?
Yes, it was the first 90 days. She did the testing on 2 different occasions, and I worried because, well, yes, that was. She mentions in her report that she was withheld. She had personal situations come up that impeded her ability to do her part of it within the first 90 days. Although I don't think she's required to do it within the turn in the report between the first 90 days, but I did my part.
Okay. Well, referring to Exhibit 5, that first page, at page 39 of the exhibits, that first paragraph, about 6 lines down, she says the evaluation was conducted in her Calabasas office on October 24th and November 14th of 2016.
Okay.
Does that refresh your recollection
Yes.
of when that evaluation took place?
Yes.
Okay. And she found no reason for you to be precluded from practice for, say, any safety reasons, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And then you've discussed the CPLEE examination and that you passed it on the 3rd attempt, right?
Right.
Okay. And as part of that process, I think you were alluding to this, but I'm not sure it came across, you requested a reasonable accommodation to take the examination.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes.
And then you submitted to an evaluation for ADHD purposes. Is that correct?
Right.
And that was performed by a Dr.
Rothman.
Yes, a Dr. Howard Rothman. Is that correct?
Right.
Okay. And those documents are begin at page 10, AGO 010 to approximately.
Is that part of Exhibit 1?
Yes, to page AGO 019. And that accommodation was granted, is that correct?
Yes.
And you were given more time to take the exam on the
Right.
3rd try, is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
And you did, in fact, pass.
I didn't have to get more time. I passed it within the same time, but I knew that I had a lot of time.
Okay. And then with regard to, again, I'm referring back to the probation report, referring to page 35 of the exhibits, you were required to submit to ongoing treatment, and I believe you've testified you are in the 12-step program
Yes,
through AA. Is that correct?
that's correct.
Okay. And your counsel's already discussed with you, you have been cited twice
Right.
for violations of probation related to failing to either call in or to submit to biological fluid testing, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And you paid those fines?
Yes, I did.
And the first fine was in April of 2018, and that was a fine of $1,000?
Yes,
And the second offense was for 3 occasions when you failed to either call in or to test.
2.
I'd like you to look at page 35, and at that last paragraph, it says June 11th of 2018. It was alleged that you failed to check in to First Source Solutions on April 16th of 2018 and April 23rd of 2018. And then additionally, on April 24th of 2018, you were selected to test and failed to do that. Does that refresh your recollection that it was 3 occasions that you failed to comply?
the first one was in January, and then the other 2 were in April.
But my question was that
Yes,
there were
I remember.
3 incidents that
Right.
led to the second violation. Correct?
The first violation of not calling in was 1. That's probation violation number 2.
Okay.
Probation violation number 3 was the failure to call twice in April. I believe it was April.
Well, it's alleged that on 3 occasions in 2018. Okay, your recollection is different.
Oh, okay. I understand. Okay.
And you've also had coursework requirements
Yes.
as part of your probation.
Correct.
Dr. Mice, may I ask that you please let me finish my questions before you answer so that the court reporter can be sure to get us both
Okay.
down? Okay, thank you. You were required to submit to coursework 12 hours, at least 12 hours of coursework during the first year of probation and additional coursework during the remainder of your probation. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And you were required to take an ethics course, and you completed that. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. And you have paid your investigation and enforcement costs that were part of the disciplinary order of $3,000?
That's right.
Okay. And you've been maintained up-to-date compliance with paying your probation costs?
Yes.
Okay. And if your petition were to be granted, are you prepared to pay the prorated probation costs for 2018?
Sure.
Okay.
Yes.
And let me ask Dr. Mice, what have you learned with regard to your responsibility as a citizen and also as a licensee to refrain from driving while under the influence of any substance that may impair your judgment? And I ask that with regard to the fact that you are on some prescribed medications. Is that correct?
Right.
Okay. And so in that regard, what is your understanding of your responsibility to engage in safe practice and to refrain from any activities that subject you to criminal violation?
If this has taught me nothing, it's taught me the absolute critical nature and the importance of the public entrusting me with this license. Especially now working with the DOR, where I see people that come in literally in wheelchairs, literally in crutches. And to work for this organization is just such a blessing. And to have been licensed with this public trust is something that is so important to me. It's more important to me now after having gone through this. I understand the board's responsibility, and I so much more clearly get it. You don't just hand these out. there's something very holy, I guess, and blessed about having to be able to have that trust. So I make sure that I only take Xanax as needed. So that's becoming less and less and less. So I don't even really have to take it very much anymore at all. So, but I can tell that everything is just kind of really in better control. My perception, my sense of self, my absolutely humbling experience of having been placed on probation. It isn't an Angie thing. It's you didn't hold your end of the bargain thing, and this was a big amount of trust the public has entrusted you with. So it's been a real learning experience.
Let me ask you, what are your plans with regard to continued involvement with the 12-step program?
I'm going to continue to go. I think I would like to get into a women's group. There's been a few women that I've met personally that are around my age. I do have the Blue Book, and I do read the Blue Book. It's friendships that have come around this better understanding. I mean, at first I was really kind of a little mole person, really. It was just real shocking. And as I got to be part of the group, and now almost 2 years have gone by, I don't want to relinquish those friendships and those ties that I've made there.
So do you, as you sit here today, do you have any plan with regard to when you anticipate or you believe you will discontinue involvement in the 12-step?
I think I'll just keep going to the speaker meeting at whenever I feel like it, and continue therapy. That is primary. And if I feel that I need a smaller group, a women's group, when I was doing Celebrate Recovery for the community church, it was on a voluntary basis. Me and another psychiatric nurse actually were running it. And it was just a little too, it was long. It was like 3 hours long. There would be like worship, singing, and then the talk. But it wasn't like you couldn't cross-talk. So I'll either have my psychologist, my therapist, find me a women's therapy group or do a 12-step women's group, because I mean, I have a lot of support, emotional support system at work, but that's really not enough. I mean, you can't really depend on that. You're working full time. I'm testing, having interns observe or me observe them. Well, I was. But I think that's what my plan will be, to make sure that I continue a pretty good support system.
Okay. And then lastly, I would just ask you, what are your plans for continuing psychotherapy that
I will continue till we both agree that I can terminate. I've known Rob for almost 25 years, and he's very excellent, and I really like that therapist, and it's helping me tremendously.
When you say until you both agree that you don't need it any longer, you're referring to you and your therapist?
Yes,
okay.
Absolutely.
I have no more questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Reyes.
Redirect briefly.
We're going to take a brief 5-minute recess, and we're off the record for 5 minutes.
Where did that pamphlet go?
Okay, let's go back on the record in the matter of the petition for early termination of probation of Angie Maez, and the Deputy Attorney General has completed her cross-examination. And Mr. Kaplan, I'm going to allow the board members to ask their questions and reserve your redirect for the end, and I'll give you about 10 minutes or so for redirect. So I'm going to now query the board members, and we'll start again on my far right with Board Member Akai Badu.
Very much. Hello. Hello. Dr. Mays.
Maez?
Yes. I just wanted to ask a few questions.
Mm-hmm.
And one question was, in terms of family, do you have, when your mother was ill, was there any family support or involvement in caring for her to assist you?
When they were all back home in Alamogordo, New Mexico, she comes from a Mexican family of 13 brothers and sisters, so there was lots of support. And then they were kind of pressing me, take her, and so I did. They were telling me what was going on with her, so immediately I flew back and I brought her over. So we all made an agreement that when it was time, I had to kind of give them psychoeducation about eventually she will become so diminished that the standard of care is 24-hour nursing. And I remember having one aunt after another calling, kind of scolding me, no, we don't put our parents in. Well, you have to. I'm a small one person, and
Do you
so
understand Ms. Badu's question? She asked whether there was support from other
there
family
was a
members.
lot of support, which is why I chose to have her institutionalized back home, where they could be there with her all the time and watching to make sure she was fine, and I was able to fly back several times.
Did any of those people move out here?
No. They all are from back home.
Do you have any sisters or brothers other than this person?
Yes, I have only one sister.
Was she involved in
No,
the care
she
at
was
all?
not involved in the care of my mom.
Just another question. Noticed that you said in 1990 with the abuse, was that a major factor in your turning to substances?
I think so. I think eventually, after being in a long-term relationship, you don't get physically hurt immediately if you're an intelligent woman, I guess. It's more of an emotional control thing. And so when I actually got physically so assaulted, I had to be taken to emergency care. I had to undergo reconstructive surgery of the right part of my face. It was devastating. And I think that's what led me to just have like an emotional downfall. I was on disability for a year.
And prior to that particular incident
Mm-hmm.
where you had to go to emergency, what was before that? There were no indications of this kind of behavior. This person,
No.
Nothing.
Nothing.
Absolutely, it
was
just came out of the blue.
Well, I think men who hit women are quite predatory and quite astute at knowing where the limits are. It's enough that they engage you in this emotional control, so there is no need to hit. Your life is really circling around this without your being aware of it. So it's not an intellectual enterprise, it's an emotional enterprise till they figure out you're checked out, you're going. And then is the first time that you get struck. I think he expected I would stay, and I didn't.
And the last question was just noticing as you were chronicling the series of events, it appeared that at every event there was a kind of go-to substance or...
Yes. I think I was in denial that I was self-medicating. And yes, in response to external catastrophic type events, it was hard for me to be self-reflective and shamed. I felt ashamed and hopeless and helpless, and I didn't like that. I'm used to being very self-sufficient, but what I didn't see is I just don't know when to stop and get help when I need it. And so that's That's where I'm at now.
Last question. What 3 things or what can you identify that would not allow you to do that again when crisis situations happen in your life? What is your alternative as opposed to substance?
Well, I have a good support system. I do a lot of exercise. I attend church. I do a lot of things that are more self-enhancing, more personally satisfying. I have a better support system now, too. I'm a lot more extroverted than I used to be, so that when I have the need to go with a gal pal and have coffee, it's usually a PhD or an MFT or something, and share, personal difficulties, the good times and the bad times. And so that's the kind of choice and decision I'm making now with others that I'm involved in with.
This is really the last question.
Oh.
I noticed you said that. I noticed you said several times during the course of your chronicling your series of events that it would usually be a PhD or an MFT, and I'm just wondering, could that sphere, is it sometime expanded beyond?
Oh, yeah. No,
that?
Those are the people I'm usually surrounded with through work or just through friendships. But I like the church group I attend, and I like the AA. And most of my friends that are very, very close confidants, I have maybe 2 or 3, are not. No, it's not just kept to. If you have an MFT, then you're okay. No, that's not at all how I meant it.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay. Board Member Horn.
Thank you, Your Honor. Hi, Dr. Maez. I've just got a couple of questions for you. The first one is, let me just ask and be clear. What do you do now in your job?
I do psychological evaluations to determine eligibility under the American Disabilities Act. It's a federal and state program throughout the United States. I do only assessments.
Okay.
I do consultations, and then I do in-service trainings.
Okay. Thanks. So I want to ask you a little bit about your the support you have now.
Mm-hmm.
Because one of the things you said, and I didn't get if this was present tense or past tense, but you said, I don't know how to stop and get help.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious about that. Is that now?
No, not now.
What would you notice now about yourself that would say, oh, I need to get some help?
Well, first of all, let me say I think most high achievers are OCD. When I see my mind going on a little, rumination, I'll call a friend. As a support mechanism, it's a reality check. But I know that what I'm not doing as much is isolating, not in a depressive manner, but just in a kind of a socially lazy manner. Mm-hmm. I can go, I have friends that have houses on the beach, and I can schlep my bike over there and we can have a bike ride. And so I'm doing more outgoing, socially outgoing things that are healthy, have nothing to do with happy hour, none of that stuff. So I find that I'm very well regarded, and it's making me, I'm not shy in particular, I think I'm just socially lazy. Mm-hmm. And so I'm kind of looking at that because it's really easy to just go on veg and order pizza.
So in part, you're less socially lazy, you're saying? And
yes.
So
I'm enjoying, I live in Santa Barbara. It's like being in Hawaii every day, So I resumed roller skating, which again is an isolated event. So people more my age have really nice houses. This one has a townhouse right on the beach. So we do bike riding and morning walking. And so that's something I know that as I'm getting better, as I'm seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, I'm like, I can do this. I've been blessed. This is like a blessing to even have this problem is a blessing, to even have a problem like this. So, I mean, not like the best blessing. It's not like a fun one, but
No, I appreciate your comments about that. So I just have a couple of questions about your 12-step involvement. And I know that people get different things out of it, do different things about it. But you said you don't have a sponsor. Have you ever had a sponsor?
Actually, the therapist that I'm seeing now was my sponsor about 25 years ago. Okay. He is the director of the dual diagnosis program, drugs and alcohol program at Sansom Clinics of Santa Barbara. And he's been there for many, many years. So I'm one of a handful of patients that he also goes. So he's kind of like, I know I can call him if I have some sort of urge or trigger. But he's very well versed in what's going on. And he's seen me at the pits, and now he's seen me now. So it's a really good reflective mirroring that I'm getting. And so the problems are very different. They're a lot more critical now. I'm not high risk for drugs or alcohol, but this the threat to livelihood, not being alive, but your threat to all your hard work that you've done all your life, and the scholarships, the money, everything that has been invested is now on the line. It's like, ugh. So that's what we discuss now. Is whenever little events occur at work. Because having to be in charge of 8 branch offices, the only psychologist, you have to deal with a lot of personalities in counselors, in support staff. And so we discuss, ways to navigate. Because every organization has emotional baggage and high-risk behaviors that you have to watch out for, the culture of each different branch office. But it's a good job. I really like it because it's it's helping people that, they put me to shame every day. I am humbled every day.
So let me ask one more question, and this is, again, back to the 12-step. Have you ever worked the 12 steps?
Yes.
Okay. And you did those with your therapist?
Yes, I did.
Okay. Okay, thanks. That's all I have to say.
Okay, Board Member Fu.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Dr. Myers.
Good afternoon.
I have a quick question about the reporting of this incident. Why didn't you report this incident to the board?
Ignorance of the law is no excuse, but I didn't even really know you had to do it 30 days after the event. I just figured you just turn it in like you do every year. When I started, it was those IBM cards. I don't even know if they have those anymore. And you just say yes, did all my CEUs, and no or yes, criminal activity, criminal events. And so I guess I should have become more familiar with it. This never occurred to me that this would ever happen. But I did not know. I was in default because at 30 days after you get a DUI, you should tell everyone. You should call the board. And I didn't know that.
So is your intention to inform the board at the time of renewal or on a yearly basis or whenever you were supposed to check in at that point?
Yes, absolutely.
Could I turn your attention to your petition on its AGO page 4, question number 3. And on the second sentence of the response, you wrote, even though my drug alcohol level was only 0.08, this is still against the law, and especially after a long work day when I was fatigued, etc. Do you think you should have gotten a pass because of your long work day and that it was only 0.08?
No. I was filling this form out to hurry and get it in because I knew that there was an availability if I got it in by February 1. So I think the answers reflect that I wasn't as verbose and concise as I could have been. But no, I wasn't at all suggesting that. It was... did I answer your question?
Yeah, yes, you did.
Okay.
I'm good for now. Thank you. Thank you for answering them.
All right.
Okay. Vice President Bernal.
Good afternoon, Doctor.
Good afternoon.
Just a couple quick questions. You had mentioned that when you forgot to call in for your testing that you eventually put a big poster up in your bedroom. And do you have other type of messaging currently up at your home to remind you to stay on track? Or
No, I've been really good now. I have that first thing reminder, my phone and my neon sign. I don't understand. It's to me, it's an anomaly because I had been so regimented in just get up and call. I don't have any plan, but I know that I probably can get one of those dingy things on my iPhone, right? Is that what you're saying?
Or I was just curious to remind yourself maybe to stay on track or, not to, that would encourage you not to drink again, just out of curiosity.
Oh, no, that's...
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I... See, when I was in college, it didn't even seem like that was an issue. It is an issue, especially now, but... No, I mean when I see all these young rehab therapists go, let's go to happy hour, and I'm like, ew, yeah. It's like things you used to do in certain parts of your life just seem so foreign now. So,
okay.
No, I really am very confident that won't be a problem. But I also am confident that I'm not going to go it alone. I'm not omnipotent. I'm not a smarty pants above asking for help. I absolutely needed help, and I'm getting it, and I feel a lot better now.
That's good. Thanks. And then also, what would you, if you were granted an early termination of your probation, what would you do differently professionally, or is this holding you back?
No, it's pretty much the same. I work for the State Department. I just do evaluations. Software testing, scoring mechanisms, and all that stuff. So it's not so much professionally that I'm doing different. I still work for the Superior Court and for the DA's office for doing victims, but mostly evaluations. I'm not doing therapy right now. But professionally, I think I'd like to extend again the intern thing. In our community, there's Pacifica, there's Antioch, there's UCSB, and they all need places for testing only. There's a ton of places. There's not that many places, but you can do a lot of therapy hours, clinical hours, but nobody in a PhD really gets to do testing. And that's it's really critical that you know that. And to me, anyway, I'm just fascinated by learning, and that was an area that fascinated me when I was in MSW. I thought, I want to do that. I want to know what those ink blots mean, and there's got to be something mysterious. It isn't. It's very, very statistically based and very sound information, and it's easy to teach to do that, and it's a good community service. So professionally, that would be fun. And the interns, boy, they keep you on your toes. You've got to be up on everything. But personally, I think I've just confided my difficulties in some supportive friends more my age that and that's been helpful.
Thank you.
Okay. President Phillips.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Dr. Mayes, did you identify yourself as an alcoholic?
Probably, yes.
You said probably, I'm not sure.
Well, when I'm seeing all the stuff that, yes, I do identify myself as an alcoholic because I cannot handle alcohol.
What was your hesitation?
Well, I guess because when I hear the stories of some of the people at these group meetings, I mean, I guess mine isn't very different. But at first it seemed different. It's just, I mean, I've never been on Skid Row. It's like, I have a problem with alcohol, and I think that it is biologically based as well. I think it's an allergy. And I knew to make sure when I was doing the research program at UCSB on dual diagnosis, I knew the efficacy of 12 steps, but I was also in denial about my own problems.
Okay. Let me ask you this. You had indicated that your current therapist has previously been your sponsor or has been your sponsor?
He was the director, he is the director of the Sansom Santa Barbara Clinic's drug and alcohol program.
Okay. Had you been in drug or alcohol treatment prior to 2003?
Yes, with him, with Sansom.
Oh, you went to Sansom?
Yes, I
as a
went to
patient.
Sansom.
Okay,
Mhm.
and so when did you first identify alcohol as being a problem?
I think in 2000 when I went there, when I saw him, I voluntarily participated in a drug and alcohol program. I was there. It was only a 3-month program, but I elected to stay on with him individually. And that's when 12 step. That's when I was in 12 step, pretty
Okay.
heavily.
So since you've been, I guess we could say, in and out of recovery since 2000?
Yes.
Okay. Could you look at AGO 6 as part of your petition? I think it's 6. Yeah, it's 6. Have you found that page?
Yes.
Okay. And if you could look at the first sentence and answer to question number 6.
Yes.
It said, I would not drive after drugs or alcohol if I were very fatigued.
Mm-hmm.
Are you suggesting there that you intend to use drugs or alcohol in the future?
No, I do not intend to use any drug. You know, it's just obviously in answering the question, that's what I would do. I would never take drugs or alcohol and drive. I would never take drugs and alcohol at all.
Okay.
I'm on antidepressants right now, anti-anxiety as needed. And I think that's well enough.
As part of your probation, you had to take the CAPLE 3 times, correct?
I had to what?
You had to take the CAPLE, the law and ethics
Oh,
exam?
yes, law and
3
ethics
times?
exam, yeah.
Okay. And on that third round, you had psychoeducational testing done, and you were diagnosed with ADHD.
Right.
But you disagree with the diagnosis.
Well, I know Dr. Harvey Presser, who's a psychiatrist who was my first clinical supervisor in the late 80s when I was full-time psychiatric social worker for LA County Department of Mental Health. We worked together for 10 years. And I know his family, and he's known me all these years.
Okay. I wasn't asking for
I called and asked him. I said, I know, Dr. Rothman, I need to get accommodations. I need more time because I'm just, overwhelmed with anxiety. And so I said, because he's a learning specialist, it has to be something that would have an accommodation. You can't just say you're crazy with anxiety. Well, you can, but... So Dr. Presser and I agreed that I really don't have ADHD. I mean, he's seen me and knows me for many, many years. We both didn't really think that. And so Dr. Ferguson, my psychiatrist now, I said, I want to know what you think because I'm not going to self-diagnose. I'm pretty high arousal. I've been this way since probably those little babies when you could see them in the preemie in the hospital. I'm one of the ones checking everything out, And so we're born with different arousal levels, period, and mine is high.
Okay. Let me ask you this question then. So you didn't necessarily agree with the diagnosis,
Well, I don't
but you
just.
used it as a basis for asking for an accommodation?
Well, Dr. Howard Rothman is a psychoeducational psychologist. Yes, I did. I didn't disagree with him about ADHD. I said I could likely have ADHD. I know I'm having completely impaired retention and learning problems with this exam.
And when he gave you testing, if I recall the test results correctly, you came out in the 99th percentile on hyperactive impulsive. Is that right?
I don't know.
You don't recall the testing?
I don't recall that. Well, I haven't read his
report. Are you an
report.
impulsive person?
I can be.
It seems like it's hard for you, for example, in today's hearing, to allow somebody to ask a full question before you respond.
Yes, which is ADHD. Yes.
Suggesting you might be impulsive anyway.
Yes, I think we've established that.
Okay. Okay. So you got DUIs in 2003 and 2010.
Right.
Okay. Were you inebriated in both those situations?
Yes.
Okay. Have there been times when you denied you were inebriated during those situations?
Yes.
Okay. So on the 16th of April and the 23rd of April, you failed to call in.
Right.
Had you realized that you'd failed to call in on the 16th?
No.
Before that? So it never occurred to you that you failed on
No.
either of those occasions? So then on the 24th, I guess you do call in?
No, I didn't call in 2 times.
Well, there's a third.
3 times, one in
The
January
third
and
time they
twice.
refer to is on the April 24th. They say that you were asked to come in for testing, or you were scheduled for testing that day and you didn't
I
either
forgot
call in
to call in.
again.
I forgot to call in twice in April.
Actually, it's, according to the violation that you were cited with, you failed to call in 3 times in April.
Well, I think Curtis probably did call them and verify that indeed I called in and hung up too quickly. So I was instructed to call and wait till they say you can hang up for it to show on a digital map. If it doesn't show, he will be it'll indicate to him, he will get feedback about, well, this one it's like a blank. So he would have to call.
So are you now saying that you did call in those days?
I did not call in on 3 different times. Once in January, twice in April.
But not on April 24th, you did call in?
Yes. Well, Curtis?
Well, Curtis isn't a witness right now. So,
Okay. Well, I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah. So you had at least 3 times in 2018, this
Right.
year,
At
where you
least
didn't
3
call in
times.
for your testing.
Exactly.
Okay. All right. Have you had any positive tests while you've been going through testing?
No.
And what kind of testing have you been getting? Has it been
Urine
blood?
testing, and then once a blood test.
Okay. Have they done any hair testing?
No.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Board Member Erickson.
Good afternoon, Dr.
Good afternoon.
Myers. I have a couple of questions, I think. Following up on Dr. Phillips, it sounded like you were about to say that on the 24th of April, you called in but hung up too quickly before learning that you needed to come in for testing.
All I know is that I paid a penalty for January, and I paid a penalty for 2 times in April. I also know, I can recall, that Curtis had indicated to me that there was no third time that I failed to call and show up.
Okay.
There were only 3 times.
We're about as clear as we can get on that, I think.
Yeah.
The fact that you forgot on, let's say, 3 times in 2018 to call in, and you paid a fine the first time.
Yes.
And then
I
3
know.
months later in April, I think if that's about the right time frame, forgot again. It seems like a red flag in terms of attention to detail, remembering obligations and responsibilities. Do you agree that it's kind of a quirk that's hard to explain? How big a problem how big a flag is this red flag?
I was terrified. I was just shocked that I had forgotten. Especially since automatic every day for almost 2 years, it was my ritual in the morning. And so I was very distraught, and I called Curtis. So I don't know. But yes, of course it was a red flag, especially since one of the days was to come in and testing. However, if you test the day before and you test the day after, but the thing is it's random testing. That's what makes it such a, like, what? A red flag. So why did you not do this then? So I don't know what to explain other than I've whipped myself plenty of times for failing.
All right, a different question, if I might. In 2010, you were drinking Santa Barbara area, getting on the freeway, pulled over 0.08, I think, blood alcohol. I think the Deputy Attorney General asked you something about judgment in doing that. Did you exercise poor judgment at that time?
Yes.
And what do you think you've learned or done to improve your ability to have adequate judgment in times of high stress?
Well, I'm in treatment for it. As I had said earlier, just having this amount of threat, a catastrophic event that is likely to impede me from ever being a psychologist again is frightening. And it really was a wake-up call. It was a real wake-up call, not just to embrace the benefit of the public trust, but the loss of everything I've worked for all through college, all through my life. And it had been unblemished since 1991. So I don't take failure well, and I don't take disappointment well. So I'm very upset with myself, and this is, I have an excellent enforcement officer that I can call, and I'm always calling, and, oh, I did this. Okay, so I just send that. Do you think this is going to be metabolite? And so I've been so sort of vigilant. So I was just so upset when I missed that, but I love my job, and I love being a psychologist, and I love sharing that with young people coming up through the ranks. So,
well, I don't think I have any more questions.
Okay.
I was trying to think if there's anything else I could ask about judgment. To me, the question is kind of when a person shows bad judgment, we kind of hope they'll take a look at what they did and learn, grow, develop ways to have better judgment, especially when they're anxious or high-stressed.
Right.
I think you're saying that you're working on that.
Yeah, I've come a long way with Rob, just in how I handle just interactions at work, understanding what's going on, and framing it in the aspect of any organization as big as this one. Every organization has triangulated. I'm always analyzing. Oh, that's triangulated information. You don't just go 3 ranks up on the food chain. On the chain of command. Every culture, every organization is different. Some are more structured, some are less, and you're always going to have your handful of personality disorders.
That's true, of course.
That like kind of throw you for a loop. So you have to just sort of learn emotional intelligence.
Thank you.
Okay.
No more questions.
Your
Thank
Honor,
you. Yes.
May I just pose a question to Your Honor and the board members? Dr. Mays' probation monitor, Curtis Gardner, is present here at the meeting, and he's just indicated to me there may be an error in the citation order for the June 2011 event, and he may be able to offer some clarification on that. So if the board is interested, they would call him briefly and have him address that.
Okay. I think so. Yeah. Do you have any objection, Mr. Kaplan, to having the probation monitor testify just as to the
Well, I guess a
error in the
request and
citation?
offer of proof is all. I don't have any objection. Apparently, Mr. Gardner has already made some comments off the record, so I'm requesting an offer of proof.
Okay.
What
Can
he's
you?
gonna say. I may stipulate to it.
Okay. Let's hear what the testimony will be
Well,
then.
it's my understanding that Dr. Mays may be correct on this. There was 2 occasions on which she failed to call rather than 3. So I want to offer him, in fairness to Dr. Mays, to clarify that issue.
Okay. So he's going to correct an error on page 81.
As I understand, yes.
I would stipulate to that.
Okay.
Well, I can't testify to it, so we'd have to have the witness testify to it. I'm making an offer of proof of what I understand it to be, but we
No
do have
objection.
the witness present.
Okay. So then, Mr. Gardner, why don't you come forward? And if you'll please raise your hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm, under penalty of perjury, that your testimony in this proceeding will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Okay, and please be seated, and please state and spell your name for the record.
Curtis Gardner, C-U-R-T-I-S, last name G-A-R-D-N-E-R.
Okay, Ms. Reyes.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Gardner, you have heard the testimony here today, and given that testimony, am I correct that you took an opportunity to review the probation file and the records with regard to Dr. Maes' compliance with her biological fluid testing? Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, we've had some question with regard to the citation order that was issued in June 2011 purportedly for 3 failures to call in or to fail to call in and test on April 16th, April 23rd, and then also on April 24th is what the citation indicates. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, and do you have some information to share with the board that might make a correction to that citation order?
Yes, I do. Dr. Mayes only failed on 2 occasions in April. On April 16th, 2018, she failed to check in, as well as April 23rd, 2018. April 23rd, 2018 was also a date where she was selected to test, but by failing to check in, she also failed to test on that date.
Okay, so would it be correct to say there was no violation on April 24th of 2018? Is that correct?
That is correct.
And in fairness, I have to ask one more question. Given your correction of this, is there any issue with regard to the fine then that she was issued? Although, again, it's a second violation and there's 2 incidents on this second violation in June 2011. Do you have any understanding as to whether or not the fine, any issues as to the fine then as a result of this correction you're making?
No, not at all. Given the totality of the previous violations, the fine wouldn't have been adjusted.
Okay, no further questions.
Okay, any questions, Mr. Kaplan?
No questions, Your Honor.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Gardner. And now, Mr. Kaplan, if you wanted any brief redirect.
No, the board members actually asked the questions that I was going to ask on redirect.
Okay. So then we'll have some closing statements. And I can hear from you first, Mr. Kaplan, since the petitioner has the burden of proof.
Thank you very much, Your Honor. We don't contend that the petitioner is perfect or cured or anything of that nature. She's engaged in a lifelong struggle with anxiety and tendency not to isolate herself and deal with stress as a result of isolation in ways that are not productive. She has undergone a tremendous amount of treatment, and she's undergone a tremendous amount of treatment and has gained a tremendous amount of insight. And we believe that there is no benefit to be had from further probation supervision of this licensee. I think her testimony has been forthright. I think she's readily admitted the mistakes that she made, and I think she's found a way to eliminate the isolation which led her to offend and use substances in a way to deal with situations that were overwhelming to her, quite clearly overwhelming to her in the past. So on that basis, we would respectfully submit that petition should be granted and that she be released from the probation process.
Thank you, Mr. Kaplan. And Ms. Reyes.
Thank you, Your Honor. I think the testimony today and the evidence presented with the exhibits certainly demonstrate that Dr. Mais is on a path to recovery, that she has instituted changes in her personal life, both in terms of moving away from being isolated so much. She is in therapy. She is going to 12-step meetings. Certainly these are all activities that would address the issues that have been presented here with regard to her anxiety, perhaps, but the substance abuse. The concern that I have, though, is I believe the testimony today has demonstrated that Dr. Mais is on a path. I think her testimony has indicated she is continuing to improve in her mental, psychological state, in her physical health as well, and these are all good things. But I do believe that she does continue to need to be on probation and monitored throughout her full probationary period. And in part, I have to say, I offer that, or I recommend that for reasons that really came from her. One is, I question the seriousness with which she presented her petition. She did not address the issues that were asked by the questions, and she's acknowledged that. She admitted that she filled it out. Thank you. That she filled it out in a hurry, or she didn't say hurry. She filled it out because she was trying to get in on time to get a particular hearing, and it makes me wonder how serious she was about actually petitioning and how serious she is about her presentation today. So I find that concerning, that I find probation to be very serious, and I find a request to ask to be terminated early from probation to be very serious, and I believe the demonstration necessary to show rehabilitation and readiness to resume practice without any kind of monitoring or supervision by the board requires a serious attitude and approach to this, and I don't know that she has necessarily demonstrated that. But also, I think contributing to that is the violations, her failure to call in, which she had no explanation for. She just did not do it, and she didn't know why. And I think that's concerning, that it's unexplained. So on that basis, I would say she's certainly moving in the right direction. She's certainly demonstrated she's taken actions to address the issues that have been presented here. But I don't believe she has demonstrated seriousness enough or have had adequate time on probation to really demonstrate that she's entitled to be off of probation. And on that basis, I would submit it.
Okay, thank you.
Brief response, Your Honor, and that is that, first of all, the letters of recommendation that are submitted and are part of the file would take issue with the argument of the AG in this case. There are licensed people who are competent, who've evaluated this individual, and that they believe that she is serious and ready for a termination of the probation and also the costs. She does not perform psychotherapy. She's not in the business of performing psychotherapy. There's really no showing that there's a purpose for continuing to exact the costs and time from this individual to be under supervision. And it is true, as the Deputy AG mentioned, that there were a couple of occasions in the application and the petition in which she could have been a little bit more perhaps complete in her responses, but she was asked about every single portion of her petition, and I believe her answers were clear and in the sound judgment of the board forthright. And for that reason, we believe that it is appropriate to grant the petition.
Okay. Thank you very much.
One last thing, Your Honor, just for the record.
Oh, the protective
I
order.
have a request for protective order sealing confidential documents. In particular, I'm requesting that Exhibits 1D, 1E, and Exhibit 5 be sealed. Counsel has been provided a copy and has indicated he does not object to this. Am I representing that correct?
Yeah, we
Yes.
already.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's correct, and I think I've already stipulated to the protective order.
So
Okay.
I do have the request, and I have a copy of the proposed order.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I'll sign that and get copies to you at the end of the hearing. And so now the matter is submitted, and we're off the record.
Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you, members of the board.
Are you closed out? Okay. We are going to now go into closed session to discuss a variety of things as specified on the agenda, including these two petition hearings and other items we have under consideration. I would say my best estimate is that we'll be done with the closed session at 3:30. I know we have a presentation from an out-of-town visitor that we want to make sure to accomplish today. So I think for those of you that need to leave because of the closed session, I would say you do not need to be back here any earlier than 3:30. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, well, let's start that one over again. We're now going to move to agenda item number 10, reviewing and considering options for knowledge and or skill-based examinations for purposes of licensure. Dr. Horn.
Thank you. I'm going to recuse myself from this part of the meeting. I work for ASPPB, the association that is creating this licensing exam, and so I'm going to exit for the conversation.
All right. Okay, well, we do have a representative here from ASPPB who's actually the head of the examination team, I guess, Dr. Matt Turner, and he's agreed to come and give us a presentation on the development of the test and the rationale behind the test so that we're all operating from an equal playing field.
Okay. Can you hear me okay? Is this...
You might want to pull a little closer.
Let's see here. How about now? Okay.
It's like a Verizon commercial.
It does sound like it. I think that happened last time. Okay, so I have a presentation. This is very similar to the one that we showed to the task force. There may be some changes to it. But you're open to ask questions along the way. Anything that will facilitate understanding, feel free to stop me. I'll try to go through some of it fairly quickly because I think this presentation can take as long as 30 minutes if I go through everything in detail. But so I'll go through it and answer any questions that you may have during or after. So for those of you who don't know, I think we're familiar with each other now. ASPPB is the Association of State and Provincial Psychology Boards. So it's a nonprofit association of all the psychology licensing boards in the U.S. and Canada. So they're mostly known for creating and maintaining the EPPP. But they work on other areas as well in an effort to provide services for licensing boards. So the PLUS application, which is a universal online licensure application that some jurisdictions use, is something that's developed by ASPPB. And then mobility programs like the CPQ, the IPC, and working towards enacting a telepsychology compact called PSYPAC. The EPPP, as it is now constructed, is the licensure exam that's used in all the U.S. and Canadian jurisdictions except Quebec. And it examines the candidate's breadth and depth of knowledge in the profession of psychology. So that's really the important piece that I wanted to mention here. The number one complaint that I hear related to the examination is that it doesn't assess skills. It doesn't assess my day-to-day activities as a psychologist. And the EPPP is developed. It does a very good job, and has for 50 years, on assessing general foundational knowledge. So all of the questions have a reference, and the purpose of that reference is for, if there's any question to the validity of that question, we can go back and look at the reference and see, is this question indeed true according to the research? So almost always that comes from graduate level textbooks or from ethics codes. And I bring that up because it's been argued that it's not assessing skills, and actually there has been some articles that have challenged the EPPP on the basis of not assessing skills. Our CEO, Dr. Steve Demers, several years ago addressed an article on this issue, and he had stated that the EPPP is a knowledge exam, and so that skills piece has always been left up to the licensing boards. But it's based on a job task analysis, and that determines the percentage of questions that are in each knowledge domain. And so a job task analysis is essentially a survey of licensed psychologists where we ask what are the critical pieces or knowledge that someone at the point of licensure needs to know. So the reason that the EPPP looks the way it looks is because that's what psychologists has told us needs to be known at the point of licensure. So what's happening here? So as of right now, and I do want to emphasize that the board has heard California's concerns as well as other jurisdictional concerns. And they've instructed me to let you know that they're writing a formal letter to all of the boards addressing your concerns. So this implementation may change, but as of right now, this is the knowledge that I have. So upon launch, the Part 1 will be the EPPP as it's constructed now, the knowledge base, and then the Part 2 will be a skills-based exam. So the idea is that we will have a standardized objective assessment of knowledge and skills needed for independent practice, and hopefully provide a more thorough assessment of competency as a whole. And obviously this is a big deal, and it's the most significant change in psychology since 1963. But really the biggest question probably is why? Why are we doing this? And psychology, like most regulated professions, have embraced this move to competency and the assessment of competence. And as licensing boards, you're charged with public protection. So public protection includes ensuring competence to practice. Now, knowledge is only one part of competence, and skills comprise another part of competence. And we've seen this in a number of doctoral healthcare professions that have implemented an assessment of competence in licensure examinations. And even in the LPC realm, that they, and I haven't spoken with the LPC group, but apparently as part of insurance requirements, they actually have two different exams that are sometimes used in various jurisdictions based on the insurance requirements to assess skills. But our current methods to assess skills, it says insufficient, but I think it's really inconsistent and not universal. Most of our jurisdictions, and in looking back on this process now, I think there probably were some areas of improvement in communication, but there has been a lot of feedback from many jurisdictions that this is something that would better inform them about their candidates. So there was a lot of jurisdictional support. We've also met with some jurisdictional resistance. But the way that skills are assessed now typically is done through letters of recommendation, through hours, through sometimes an oral exam or a jurisprudence exam. And the problems with some of those methods is it may not always have a universal standardized method of assessment or the same kind of psychometric rigor. And we look at some of our own evidence in this. Well, I wanted to address the accreditation issue. We hear a lot, well, if you're going to do this, then let's not assess students from accredited programs. If they're from an accredited program, they could bypass this level of assessment. But accreditation is really for programs, and there's a lot of variation in the individuals within a program. And even across accredited programs, from our own information, we've looked at our EPPP pass rates, and we've had accredited programs that, and I'm talking APA or CPA accreditation, Canadian Psychological Association, pass rates from 13% to 100%. Variations in what the requirements for API hours, so that's the internship hours. And most importantly, I think the supervisor's ratings, which is relied on very heavily in many jurisdictions, we know at a high stakes level that it's overwhelmingly positive and not reliable for those purposes. So why now? And I think it was a confluence of a lot of things. This discussion has been going on within ASPPB for longer than I've been there, and it's going with the field. It's this assessment of competence as a whole, but we have a greater understanding of how to do it. We have essential agreement across the U.S. and Canada about competencies that are needed. And what I mean by that is the competencies that develop the blueprint for the examination are basically created through this job task analysis. And so we did that in a very thorough, methodical, and scientific way. But if you compare it to the CPA model of competency or the APA model of competency, they map on pretty well. And I bring that up because I think psychologists as a whole generally know what competence looks like. In technology, it's now available to assess competency a little more thoroughly. So the idea here is that the EPPP Part 2, and in turn the enhanced EPPP, is being developed to provide a better or enhanced information about knowledge and skills of the candidates for licensure, and provide that in a reliable, valid, and legally defensible way. And that this development is in line with competency movement in psychology. That being said, this shows you just a little bit about where we are in development. And this started back in 2010 with a competency model development. So they did a job task analysis in 2010. That was done again. That developed the initial competency model. And then in 2016, we did another job task analysis, and that resulted in some changes in the EPPP as it is now, and also the skills basis of the exam. The job task analysis gave us the content outline, and we are in process of writing items now. We do have hundreds of items, just had our first examination committee review meeting to look over some of those items. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that process. And what we hope to do in early next year is to do some pilot testing, and that'll give us some information anecdotally about what do people think of these items, how can they get through these items, and more importantly, what's the timing, because some of these items are a little bit longer, and so we don't know how long they will take. again, the job task analysis surveyed 2,736 licensed psychologists from 61 of the 64 jurisdictions, 84% from the U.S., 16 from Canada. And this is the blueprint, or basically the model. And I know in some of your materials you have a greater breakdown of these are the domains and how they weight. So the exam will always look, it'll have a certain number of items towards each of these areas. And within those areas, you can see the breakdown of what's measured within that.
Just so the board members know, I think when we had put the job task analysis out there, it was my understanding that quite a few of those respondents from the United States were from California. You guys had a pretty good turnout, just so that they know.
Right. I don't remember the exact numbers, but California was very well represented. And that might be in one of our previous documents. So one question that comes up often is validity. So how do I know this is a valid exam? And it's a really good question. And it's also a tough discussion. So licensing exams are established, the validity is established through a content validation method. And that's a little counterintuitive from what we say. Most of our ways of validating things, we'll say, well, what does this predict? Will it predict disciplinary issues, or will it predict that I am a better psychologist? Essentially, what a licensure exam does is it sets a criterion based on the expertise of the people who do the work. So psychologists evaluate, one, through this job task analysis, what do we need to assess? And that's how this whole process started. Then it's written by psychologists who know what psychologists need to know and what skills they need to have. It's then evaluated by reviewers who are also experts in that area. And it's all built to the test specifications. And so there's multiple levels of content review. Ongoing, there's psychometric analysis on an item level. And that ensures that an item is not too hard, not too difficult, or too easy, and also that it discriminates. So it actually looks, is there something psychometrically going on that may indicate there's two answers? So sometimes, even after all these reviews, you pick that up in the psychometric data. And then there's the standard setting, which sets the cut score. And that brings in psychologists, mostly newly licensed psychologists, and they review that final form item by item and give us a rating of relevance and what their belief is that an minimally qualified entry-level psychologist will do on each item, and that using their ratings, we come up with a final cut score on the exam. So I mention this because I know there's concerns about, well, we have to see what the data looks like before we know if this is a valid exam. This is the same process that's undertaken for any licensure exam, all licensure exams. And at several of the meetings, we've got into these discussions about predictive validity, and it's great because we're dealing with a very smart population, but really, it's like a driver's license. If I score higher on this driver's license, it doesn't mean than, say, Richard Petty, or he's a race car driver, right? It doesn't mean that I'm a better race car driver than him. It just means we both have demonstrated at that point in time enough knowledge that we were safe to get on the road. And so there's been several articles out there. So I've tried to address the predictive validity issue, and I can give you some articles about why predictive validity is not what is necessary for this type of exam. But I did want to emphasize that this is being created the same way that the EPPP has always been created, in the same way that the medical exams are created, and virtually all other, actually not virtually, all other licensure exams are created in this method. So real quickly, just in terms of our item writing process, We recruited as many volunteers as we could get because this was a new endeavor for us. Over half of those folks were early career psychologists, which is great because they know really what's needed at that point. It was also great to see their enthusiasm and wanting to be a part of this process. We've had several item writer workshops to train the writers. And this is tough because writing an item, it might sound easy, but it's not. And when I first started at ASPPB, I wrote 10 good items on assessment. I thought, well, I'm an expert in this and I can do this. Of those 10, 0 were accepted by our reviewer. So it's a little bit of an art form. Coming up with the correct answer and then clearly incorrect answers is difficult. So it's been a developing process, and we've had 3 workshops. The items have gotten better as we've gone along, and adding that skills piece to it is an added nuance. But the way that our process works is there's a committee for each of the domains with one reviewer above a stable of item writers that write towards that domain. And it's an iterative process. It goes back and forth until the committee head is satisfied that that item is acceptable, and then it gets put into the test bank. We then have an exam committee that finalizes each item, and in this case, it's really been a process of finalizing all items. We're not even, when we met, it wasn't about creating a form, it was about going through items and finding what worked and what didn't. But before a form is created, this exam committee will look at every item and make sure that it is relevant, whether it's correct, and it's a good item for entry level. And then the items are then pre-tested, and in the case of this exam, the first administration is essentially a pre-test. And I can talk more about that in a minute. And the items that achieve the acceptable statistics are then incorporated into an exam. This was part of the initial item development workshop. In terms of item types, we're going to have your traditional multiple choice, except the multiple choice on this exam will actually be 3 options instead of 4 options. And what we find when we do 4-option multiple choice is there's that 4th one that no one picks, and it's essentially, it's not always useless, but there's a lot of research to support that 3 items for higher level exams are effective. So that's how we've created the multiple choice. There's also multiple select. So as psychologists, we might not all agree on how to handle a case. So there may be more than 1 correct answer or two correct answers out of 5. And the candidate, it will tell the candidate how many to select. But it gives us a little bit more flexibility in creating real-world items, scenarios, and vignettes. And items with exhibits, and an exhibit is essentially a supporting data for this question. So you might have test protocols, you might have an interview from someone, and it allows you to create a deep scenario with various levels of information to get at a candidate's skills. We've also created animations, and we've developed in process of developing 12 animated scenarios, and that also adds some richness to some of these scenarios. They are cartoons, so it's some body language you may not get, but you certainly can get some feel and tone from some of these. And I have a sample I can show you from our vendor. It's not one of the ones that we're using. It's from HR, but I can show that to you. We tried to target real-world disciplinary issues, and so we looked at a disciplinary data system and found what are the things that people are getting in trouble for and tried to write some items towards that. We looked at the top 4 malpractice claims and tried to write item content towards that. So I have some sample items, and as we've gone further in this, I hope to have some that have been designated real items that we can give you samples. These were written to show you content, what will it look like, but now having gone through this process, I think there's some much better items that we can pull and give you samples to. So I'll send those to you when we're available, and we're going to have that available for candidates next year as well. But just to give you a flavor for what this would look like, I will show you this here, and this was something we just recently presented this week at the APA convention. But this is a general applied question, and I won't go through it all, but what I wanted you to see is that this is it's a question about somebody who is working in an accounting firm, and the CEO wants to do something with psychological evaluation results. So this is the format that a candidate would see. You can see they can make comments, they can use a scratch pad, that may or may not be there, but they can strike through things, highlight, so they can doctor up this any way that they like. But you can see that there's 3 options that are considered correct here, and it says what factors must the psychologist consider before taking action. I know that's kind of small on this form, but 3 were considered correct in this instance. Then there's a consultation 2, so it gives you a little bit more information about the case. So discussing the request with the CEO, the psychologist finds out that the CEO is interested in reorganizing the firm and wants to use this data as part of the decision making. And the consent form is in an exhibit, so I'll just flash over and you can see that then the candidate has access to a consent form. And with that information, the CEO plans to use the results from the assessment of the personality and intellectual functioning of the employees and what should the psychologist do. And it says choose the 2 most important. So those 2 are the psychologist should educate the CEO to explain the purpose, use, and limitations of the tests. The psychologist should explain to the CEO that only those qualified can accurately interpret the testing. But as you can see, and then here's a third question that comes out where the employee asks the psychologist if they could see them for a few counseling sessions in their private practice, since the psychologist already knows me. And so there's a question about that. So that was a general applied type question. There is another sample here, and I can give these all to you. And so you can have a feel for what's on here. But this is more of a case formulation about a crisis situation, and there's progressively more data about what's going on with this person, and asking some questions about what you would do here. So there's a family history, mental status exam. So it provides the candidate with some data. Something else happens. This is a subsequent session. This client is getting very upset and says, I don't know if I can go on without him, in reference to her partner. When the psychologist says, tell me more about how you're feeling, she says she's in love with her boyfriend and has pictured her life going forward with him as her main relationship. She's been crying since he left last weekend and is feeling worried and desperate. And so it asks, what are the 2 most important issues the psychologist should address during this session? And the answers being availability of social report, and then suicidal ideation or intent. Obviously, there's other things that you might also ask, but in a crisis situation, those would clearly be the most important. And it goes on to give you some more information, and then progressively asking more questions about what you should do in the scenario. I don't know if this is going to come through or not, but this is, again, this was through the Human Resources group, but it gives you an idea of what the avatar looks like. And I've had a chance to review some of the work on the avatars that have been done, and I was very pleased with how they turned out. Even the acting seems better than this one, but it was real-world situations that psychologists would run through. So. Okay. Oops, sorry. Let me get out of this. I don't want to do that 20 times. All right. So anyway, that's essentially where we are. And hopefully that gives you a little bit more. I don't think that I've gone through those samples with the group just yet, but a little bit more of a flavor of what's in there. The key thing that I can tell you from looking at some of the items that have been developed is that they are really very much more applied, detailed, more about what you would do than what you know. And so I think that's the key distinguishing factor that's relevant to you all as a board. With that, I'll open it up to whatever questions you guys may have.
I have a question that's come up several times.
Sure.
And that is, what was the evidence base upon which the determination was made that you needed to add the skills section to these?
Right. So I think we've known for many years that we were just not assessing that. And clearly that you can look in the literature, and that's the critique of the EPPP is that you're not assessing skills. But so when we, and again, some of this was done years and years ago. The discussion's been going on for some time. It clearly has not been assessed. And then knowing how it is being assessed and knowing that, so for example, oral exams have attempted to fill that gap, and those haven't always been successful. So there was an understanding that, and licensure exams all are developed, I believe, this way, is that there's this knowledge piece, and as they evolve, there's more complexity that needs to be assessed. But 50 years ago, this was probably the best way to assess candidates. But then through the job task analysis is you bring in, it starts before the survey, because you bring in experts and they let you know what they believe needs to be assessed. So that sort of expanded that blueprint. So our blueprint went from being, I guess it was 71 knowledge statements to 130 or so knowledge statements and behavioral exemplars representing what the knowledge and the skills that need to be assessed. So then, with all that, if you're going to do this in a scientific way, there was really no way to do that in one setting. It was too large, or one 4-hour setting at least. And so that's essentially how it evolved.
Are there other questions from board members?
You should, if you go back to, if you don't mind,
Sure.
a picture of the ones who actually make up an opinion, who's involved in making up questions and all of that. Just wanted to see how diverse that particular group was.
Let's see if I can. Let's see here. Let's pop up here. You can kind of come up and take a closer look if you like. I think we try to capture diversity, and we always try to do that. And I think sometimes you do well, and sometimes you don't. But I think this was a pretty good group of folks this time around.
And does this group, how often does this group change?
So this group will probably stay fairly stable. Once you train an item writer, you want to hang on to them because it's, like I said, it's difficult to do. The bulk of our work has been done in person because there's so much training and development that goes on, and especially with a new type of item. So these folks, some people will come and go, but they also work remotely into our system. So they'll enter in items into the bank. So some of that work goes on remotely on an ongoing basis, but during the initial stages, most of it was face-to-face and really learning how to do this. Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us a little bit about where other healthcare professions are in terms of using skill-based exams?
Yeah, most doctoral level healthcare professions have 2 to 3 exams. So there's a knowledge exam that's typically done in a manner that we're proposing with our early entry option, and I didn't talk about that in this presentation, but after coursework is really where most of the professions are taking that knowledge piece, and then the skills piece is a little bit closer to licensure. The medical doctors have an additional exam that's really about an observation of your skills, and those are called Auskey exams, observed structured clinical examinations. So you fly to a center and they have actors that actually portray a case. So we went and met with them and talked to them about how they did that. And it was great. It was really interesting to see what they do, and they even get evaluations from the actors in terms of their demeanor and how they come across. The problem is it was enormously expensive. I think it was $1,600 for that examination, and we thought we could assess a large portion of those skills in a computer-based method as opposed to trying to do that face-to-face. But that's the way, as I understand it, it's done. It's not, and like I said, the counselors, to the best of my knowledge, they have added a skills piece. But and again, I didn't talk to them directly, but my understanding that was driven by insurance groups that said, if we're going to reimburse, then we need some demonstration of skills. I know our CEO has told me, and I haven't been in these meetings, but he meets with other healthcare groups, and that's the concern he has, is that we're not up to speed with those other organizations.
Other questions from board members? Are there any questions from the public? Dr. Newman? Please. Turn your microphone on.
I think that's it.
Did you get a green light?
I did.
Yep.
Okay.
I want to thank you, Matt, for that presentation. I also want to thank the board for consideration of this issue. I know you've created a task force that I'm part of, and there's been some interesting conversation there. I also want to welcome you to the Wright Institute. By the way, I haven't had a chance to do that. I'm the Vice President of Academic Affairs here, and this is our 50th year. We are now the oldest freestanding professional school in the United States that has pretty much remained true to the original founding mission of the school, which is to educate clinicians who can provide relevant and needed services to society. So I had several questions. I should also mention I'm on the Commission on Accreditation, and I only mention that to say that nothing I say has anything to do with the Commission's viewpoints. I don't believe the Commission has a viewpoint. But I do want to say that I have a lot of concerns about not the second step of the exam, but the process for this exam, in how it might create a longer delay to licensure, like a time to licensure, is a very grave concern for me. Watching graduate students who are applying themselves to become part of this profession, investing tremendous amount of time and money to do this, and whose ability to have gainful employment is dependent upon completing the process of licensure. Some of the issues I've heard with respect to this exam have to do with we can move the first part of the exam to the pre-graduate period of time. In other words, students could take this, I think you mentioned, after they completed their coursework. I have some concerns about that. I know that it happens already in some states, but I do have some concerns about that and about how it might impact the education of students. For one thing, I think we're teaching students critical thinking skills. I mean, that's really what I think we're doing. The knowledge base of psychology is vast. As an accredited program, we have to cover certain domains of knowledge, social psychology, cognition, affect, history and systems, all of those areas. I think we do a pretty good job. I don't think that a lot of our graduates, not ours, the Wright Institute, but collectively accredited program graduates are getting through without having that basic capability. This is not me arguing against an exam. I actually think a skills-based exam is a great idea. I wish you'd get rid of the first exam because I think it's kind of a waste of time. But nonetheless, I mean, there's a standard that you all have to use as protecting consumers' interests. I understand that. But I would really like for the Board of Psychology and for ASPPB to give much more consideration to this issue of time to licensure and also to the structure of the exam and when it should happen. If it moves into the graduate program, there are a lot of ways in which I am concerned about the movement to teaching to an exam as opposed to teaching critical thinking skills. We know that the students learn a lot of this stuff in their coursework, but to take the EPPP1 requires weeks, if not months, of study, devoted study. And it's also an expense. It's not just the cost of the exam, it's the cost of the practice materials. So now we're talking about practice materials, two times the number of practice material, 2 times the cost of the exam. And the question is it going to be 2 times the length of time it takes to get done? And also, what happens to the graduate curriculum if EPPP1 becomes a focus of what students have to accomplish before they graduate? Is it going to push the dissertation off further? Are they going to go into deeper debt in order to make that happen? These are questions that I don't think have been addressed very effectively by ASPPB. I don't think they present these issues to the Board of Psychologies anywhere. I really have not heard those arguments made or those concerns. They're not really arguments. I'm not against the EPPP2. I think it's a good idea. I don't think the way it's been planned and the way it's being executed has actually been very thoughtful. And I really believe that there needs to be some thought given to this. We don't want to, psychology has to attract the best people. We really need to attract the best people. When we make the time to licensure longer and more difficult and more costly, so if it's going to take 7 years from the time you start till the time you get licensed, that's a long time. That's a really long time, and that's a big expense. That's a lot of debt. So I'm expressing these concerns to the board because I want you to at least acknowledge that and going forward and how you think about this. There has to be some concern given to the time to licensure and to how this could affect graduate education. That's it.
I'd like to make a couple of comments on that, and I appreciate those comments, and I wanted to reiterate that I think that this has been an interesting process, and I think that in my discussions with the ASPPB board, they've heard you and they've heard other constituents, but mostly they're listening to the boards because that's who they serve. But so I do know that some information is going to come out to you guys very soon, and I think will address some of those concerns. As far as the early entry option, those are good points. I hear both sides of the coin on that from trainers. So some people feel like it's a great idea and that it is something that will allow students to move through the licensure process faster. Some people feel that it's going to be one more thing to an already overburdened graduate student population. We do know this, that the earlier that folks take the licensure exam, the more likely they are to pass. And so as a student, that's a tremendous advantage to me. But I think it's not so much about pass rates to me. I think it's just when is it most relevant. And one of the problems, in my opinion, is that we all get sort of this foundational graduate training, and and by the time we get to licensure, we're a couple years past that, and we start to specialize, and I think some of that general foundational knowledge is a little bit harder to retrieve, and so that inadvertently fuels this third-party test prep industry, and people are paying thousands of dollars for this. That I understand that people will still buy these materials, and I understand that we won't get rid of them, but I do believe taking it earlier would be an advantage, and you may not need those materials. And so ASPPB is going to reevaluate that issue as well. But I also think that this issue of early entry would be optional. So if a candidate didn't want to take it at that point in time, they can always take it at the point of licensure. So it's not required. But as a student, I would certainly want to do that.
I'm going to just, for one moment, reflect anecdotally on my experience taking the EPPP.
Yeah.
And that was that, and I went through an accredited program, and we had a broad base of knowledge that we were expected to master, but we were also expected to start to think like psychologists. My experience was a lot of the things on the EPPP were things that were not necessary to my education as a clinician.
Right.
I was trained as a clinical psychologist in a professional school of psychology.
Mm-hmm.
So we didn't have quite as broad a base of knowledge as was being tested by the EPPP.
Mm-hmm.
So I actually found that the preparation courses were actually necessary in order to bring into mind all of the subject areas that weren't necessarily covered in an accredited program. And I think I mentioned when we met with ASPPB earlier this week that it was that things like industrial organizational psychology were just not part of my graduate training. So I think the knowledge-based portion of the examination, and I love those kinds of things. It's a lot of memorization and regurgitation. I'm fantastic at it. It's like I'm an idiot savant. So I mean, I have mixed feelings about the knowledge-based portion of the test, but I do think that it's important to have some kind of knowledge base. And given that we have a general license that can cover a variety of different fields, we end up with maybe more knowledge areas that are going to be within the scope of people's actual practice once they've become licensed. So I just wanted to mention that in passing. I know, Dr. Newman, you had an additional comment you wanted to make.
Let me also make a comment on that. That experience is not exclusive to psychology from talking with other groups. And so they all struggle with, I don't know if they all do, but many groups struggle with, specialization versus generalization. And so it is a common issue that I've heard.
When I took the bar examination, I knew more about the law after I took the bar examination than I ever knew again, just simply because you had to learn 15 different domains, many of which you weren't going to practice. So I understand what you're saying.
I want to say two things. One, graduate training is much harder now than it was when I was a student. The breadth of knowledge, the amount of work you have to do, the number of clinical hours you have to perform has increased exponentially since I became a student in 1987. I had a question about this group. And the question is, do you know how many members of that group were trained in professional schools versus university academic departments? Because university academic departments are training people to be educators more so than they are to be clinicians. We're training clinicians. I want to have some sense of whether that group reflects the values of the programs that I might represent.
We tried to, I couldn't tell you right offhand, but I probably could research and tell you how many are coming from professional schools. What we did require for this exam is that everybody is licensed and practices. So what I was pleased with is that we had so many younger folks because they really know at that point of licensure what's required. So that's not required for all aspects of the knowledge exam. We try to get folks that are licensed, our committee members that are reviewing things are generally licensed, but for some areas like cognitive, they sometimes are not. but everyone who works on this exam is licensed. Yeah, sure.
I did want to mention also, since the question had come up earlier about participation by California psychologists in this process, that at least as it related to the Job Analysis Task Force, we received a report from ASPP early on in this process that 33% of the psychologists who were involved in that Job Analysis Task Force actually came from the state of California. So we had a really good representation in that process.
That was higher than I thought. So.
Yeah. Any further questions from the public or the board? Dr. Pugliotti?
I'm a lawyer, and no one ever called me a doctor.
Okay, well, enjoy it while it lasts. Honorary degree.
First of all, I apologize for coming in late. You had a closed session, and I was hoping to get some work done and get there just when it ended, and I was excuse me, closer. Oh, turn it on.
Or non-doctor.
Thank you. Again, thank you all for doing this presentation, and thank you, Mark, for being here. And I apologize for running late, but getting down to it, if there's something I'm covering that's already been discussed or resolved, just let me know, and I'll just stop. But the underlying questions, I don't know if they've been answered, which is this in the best interest of the public and the profession of our citizens in California? And that in terms of where's the evidence that this test is needed and that this test will resolve the problems that are perceived. And I understand the overall trend towards wanting competency measurements. That was talked about last time as well. And the other things were talked about were that EPP pass rate has been non-uniform all across the board. Some schools do really well, other ones don't. Other issue is that the phenomenon with the top 10% eval is everyone's in the top 10%. So how is that possible? So it's really not accurate in terms of supervisory evaluations. And then the other part was complaints. And this was presented at ASPPB conferences, that one of the other issues is how do we reduce the complaints that the boards are seeing. And the one thing was raised at that point, that the issues that come forth as I've watched this morning with complaints is that they're more about ethics or misunderstanding the law or just simply not doing certain things with integrity. And I don't see how this exam would actually address those issues. So I don't know if the issues underlying what evidence is there that this exam is what problems is this exam trying to redress, and how is this exam, where's evidence to show that this exam redresses or addresses those issues? I don't know if that's already been answered.
I think in the next, continuing into tomorrow, there's going to be continuing dialogue around these subjects, but I would be interested in hearing Dr. Turner's response to that.
Yeah. Well, we talked a little bit about that earlier in terms of, I want to go to the disciplinary issue because this comes up a lot, and I don't know how this will impact discipline. I think many times that depends on the types of discipline that you get. Sometimes it's poor judgment or not necessarily a competence issue, it's a decision-making issue. But if your only metric is the number of discipline cases, I think that's a poor way to evaluate this issue because those are only the folks that you see. I think this is clearly an issue of moving with the field, moving with other fields as well that we're clearly far behind, and addressing an issue that we're not assessing. And I think I mentioned in the letter, and this is just coincidental, something came out in TEP a few months ago, and they surveyed students about the competency of their peers. And 77% of the folks said they were concerned about the competency of their peers. And I think that's really the issue, is that we know knowledge is it's not an issue. And I think Gil brought up a good point. He was saying, well, throw that away and let's just test skills. I don't know if I'd go that far. But I think it's a gap in what's been tested. It's a gap. There's no universal way that is being done right now in a legally defensible way across all jurisdictions to assess skills. And it's always been up to the licensure boards to assess that piece. And as you mentioned, the 10% supervisor rating rule. Right. And so I understand the need for clear, hard data, and disciplinary issues are a good source of that. This may reduce some of your disciplinary issues, I don't know. But that's not the impetus of this. I think the impetus is that it's not being assessed, and we are putting people out to practice maybe that aren't ready. And I think that's really the point behind this.
Thank you, Matt. Regarding Dr. Newman, his regarding the use of just one exam, and if you have the EPP2, in fact, you can't really test on skills if you don't have the knowledge first. I shouldn't actually speak for him, but just in terms of possibly combining the two exams might work better. But again, it goes to if we're going to be adding this burden to both the students and to the boards, well, less to the boards, but to the students and people entering the profession, I'd like to know that it's warranted in terms of cost, in terms of time, in terms of what it might do in terms of weeding it, making it harder for minorities and people in low-income populations to actually become psychologists. I think that's another issue that really I'm not sure has been addressed either. The other thing is that the overall process, I think, that could be improved. Everything, obviously, things can always be improved. But I heard from CUDCUP, I've heard from NCSPP as well about their concerns about involvement in the process. So it's not just CAPIC, and it's not. I don't think it's just California either. I suspect that other states. I'm concerned that, yeah.
Sorry, Mr. Pugliatti, would you mind just saying what those acronyms are for the group? Thank you.
Yeah, you said NCSSP,
Yeah.
and then you said APIC.
I did.
A lot of people that are listening in might not be familiar with those organizations.
That's. Oh, darn! You're going to catch me. Thank you.
It's the National Council Schools of Professional Psychology. It's the Professional Psychology Organization.
That one I knew, but CUDCUP, I'm not positive with the acronym. They're a training council, and I apologize. I didn't mention APIC, but oh, sorry. You want to say that again, Gil? For CUDCUP.
Council of the University Department of Clinical Psychology.
Okay. And then I'm with CAPIC, which is the California Psychology Internship Council. That one I do know, so thank you for that. Yes.
I'm sorry, and you said you were an attorney, is that correct?
Yes, I am.
Okay,
yeah.
thank you.
Mainly, I don't use it formally. I just use it as to help me understand legalese dealing with not-for-profit organizations like mine. But I am licensed currently. But back to, so there's the evidence for the actual need for it to add this burden to the students. There's the timing. There's the impact on low-income and populations of color entering the profession or trying to enter the profession. I'd also, just as a larger question to the board in terms of, have you talked with anyone else from like Texas or New York in terms of where they're standing on this, in terms of possibly pushing back with ASPPB in terms of either delaying it or reassessing the need or the way this exam is being put forward to all the licensing boards?
Maybe I can express my understanding of this, and you can clarify it further, Dr. Turner. But there are some jurisdictions that are being vociferous in their opposition to the test. The two that I'm most aware of are New York and Louisiana. It seems that the majority of jurisdictions are either supportive or resigned to. Sorry to use that word, but that's probably the best. That's probably a fair characterization. So that at this point, the vast majority of jurisdictions, but there is actually a listserv among board chairs.
Okay.
So I do get a chance to see some of these materials come across my computer screen. I think Mr. Fu's seen some of these materials before as well. So there's some dialogue that's going on because it is a membership organization, and the jurisdictions are the members. So there's some discussion going on, but it's not. I wouldn't exactly call it a wave.
Okay. I'm going to leave it here, except to say I'll be here tomorrow, and if there's definitely appreciate your time. And Matt, again, this is your third time here, or fourth?
Getting used to it. Yeah,
okay.
It's a good time.
So, thanks.
I call it death by paper.
If you don't mind, can I address the minority issue and how we're addressing that? Because I think that's something that is pretty important, not just to California, but I think all of us as psychologists. Historically, ASPPB has not collected ethnicity data. The rationale for that, I'm told, was that there were some jurisdictions that had some legal prohibition of this. However, California might have been one of them. However, not being part of the jurisdictions, that is something that we can collect, and the ASPPB board did vote to begin collecting that information. So that has a couple of things that are very important from my perspective, is that we can look at things like pass rates and differential pass rates, but more importantly, we can do item level analysis. And that allows us to look at sort of red flag items that maybe are performing differentially, and then have those reviewed. So we're trying to reduce the potential of bias in this exam. And I've talked with other groups, and pharmacy actually wants to do what we're doing. So they're looking to us to see how to do this. And this is not something that's done. Some of the medical folks have done this for some time. And the other thing we try to do is just try to get a diverse group of writers and subject matter experts at all levels. Sometimes we can do better, but I think that is something that's not lost on us, and so we are concerned about that, and I can say that we're trying to do what we can as developers to address that issue.
I think the other question that you were raising, I was going to call you doctor again, so I thought I'd just walk away from it, is the question of differential impact in terms of lower socioeconomic status students and how the additional cost will differentially impact them. So that's obviously something that's in the mix in terms of what we're discussing.
Right, and I think that's something that's been brought up to the ASPPB board, and so there are some ongoing dialogues on, are there some options or some things that can be done? So no decisions on that have been made, but it's certainly something that the board is aware of.
I know that's certainly one of 3 themes that came up during the task force meeting, and I would be wondering if that would be an appropriate time to recapture for the board some of those discussions that we had, or do we want to continue the Q&A?
We're going to actually go to your report after we take a brief break, but I wanted to finish with Mr. Turner or Dr. Turner first before we did take a short break, and then we'll do your task force report.
In terms of differentials, is there a difference in regional differences as well? Is there a way to capture that, or does that capture?
She was asking about regional differentiation. I mean, we look at pass rates. We typically look at it because we collect it for school reports, but we certainly can analyze that. But we were, and you can look at state by state or province by province, but it hasn't been something that we've analyzed in terms of pass rates by state. For instance, we report it to the states if they need it, but it's not something that we've historically analyzed.
I think it would be interesting to see the impact of those regional differences. That's all.
Any further comments from the public or the board before we thank Dr. Turner for taking the time to meet with us again? Dr. Lindercrow?
Hi, I'm Dr. Jo Lindercrow, the CEO of the California Psychological Association. Hi, Matt. I just wanted to ask about a couple of things that you referenced earlier. I'm not sure I heard you correctly, or maybe you were alluding to the fact that there has been some concern about the implementation date in 2020. Did I hear you correctly, or did I just want to hear that maybe ASPPB is rethinking that, and maybe there might be some modification of that?
There is some consideration going on right now, and the board of directors is evaluating some of the concerns, like you mentioned, like the implementation date, and they're going to send a letter to all the jurisdictions once they've finalized their decision on that.
Okay. I know that was one of the things that the task force raised as well. And then just to make sure that this is on the table as well while we're thinking about the groups that may potentially be disadvantaged. I know that you had mentioned something at the task force meeting about that you're looking at issues around accommodations for individuals with disabilities, and I have heard in a couple of conversations I've had recently, in both at the APA convention as well, that's an area, and I know that you all are looking at that, but just to get that, make sure that's on the record as something that the board will think through as well.
We certainly are always trying to do what's right in terms of disability accommodations, and so some of that has to do, if we were talking about accommodations, like how do we develop an exam that if we need to deliver it in an alternative way, can it still be administered in that way, or do we have to come up with an alternate item type? But we're willing to do whatever's appropriate when it comes to disability accommodations.
Thank you very much.
Okay, well, thank you, Dr. Turner. We really appreciate you coming and taking the time to meet with us, and we'll see what happens.
Okay, well, thanks very much. And like I said, I've appreciated our discussions, and I know that the board has heard your feedback, so I hope that you'll be hearing some information soon. And I unfortunately cannot be here tomorrow, so hopefully this was sufficient in terms of what information you need. And but you can always call me or email me if you have additional questions.
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much.
We're going to now take a 5-minute restroom break. That's 5 minutes, people, and then we'll come back, and Dr. Fu will talk to us about the task force. Given that fact, before we do, Mr. Fu, formerly Dr. Fu, is going to now summarize for us a little bit about what happened relative to the task force.
And I promise I will go right to the very end for the report. So thank you, Dr. Phillips. And as you mentioned this morning, we will be carrying this item over to tomorrow, so there won't be a vote today. And I just wanted to reiterate that for our listeners who might be just joining us and didn't join us this morning. And so with that, I also want to just acknowledge Dr. Kasuga's chairpersonship of the EPPP2 task force and all the members of the task force, including Dr. Newman and Mr. Pilati, who are in the audience today. And really, the 15 members reflected a cross-section of stakeholders. So thank you, Mr. President, for putting together that task force. And then finally, of course, Dr. Turner, who's joined us from Georgia now several times, and for this presentation to both the task force and the board today. My role today is really to capture the discussions at the 35,000-foot level of the task force and reflect the task force comments back to this board. Much of the work of the task force would not have been possible without the outstanding work of our board staff and council who shepherded 15 folks through that process. So very much thanks to you and for your continued assistance to that. It's clear that from the first two meetings, several themes emerged, and the following reflect those comments. Firstly, and I think we heard some of that already in public comment, was that task force members really expressed their disappointment in the doubling of the exam costs. The introduction of the enhanced portion of the exam would add an additional $600, raising the fee to $1,200, and that adding the cost of the license without any scholarship opportunity, particularly for folks who are interested in serving underrepresented communities in our state, certainly prompted pause and intense inquiry. We did request a response, and the ASPP board provided us an answer that they were looking into it, but there was no confirmation that it would actually happen. And in fact, just on Monday, we heard that there are a lot of other expenses that the board use that examination money for, and so it's unclear if there would be a scholarship opportunity yet, as of now. Secondly, some members of the task force reacted to the notion that only APA-accredited schools would be allowed to bypass our state regulatory board to take the EPPP Exam 1, Part 1. Our board has recognized regional accreditation as well, and the conversation from the task force was that it would be unfair for students who are in regional accreditations to be prohibited from taking this exam, from Part 1 of the exam, absent any changes here in our state to our own regulations. And so the task force members generally concluded that to create parity with the ASPPB's decision to allow APA-accredited schools to take the EPPP Part 1, the board should consider adopting changes to our regulations to allow students, regardless of APA accreditation, so long as they are accredited, with access to the EPPP Part 1. I think there was also a sentiment that recommendation should not be seen or perceived as a tacit approval of the EPPP a tacit approval of the exam, of the Part 2 exam. It's clear that the task force made those recommendations in response to an unfortunate predicament we're facing with the implementation of the exam. And I think that's a segue to the third issue raised during our conversations, were that with the implementation date of January 1st, 2020, we would be unable to implement the exam by the deadline given by the ASPPB. And that would mean on our end, because we require 2 to 3 years for a potential regulatory change, we would be in a situation where we would be unable to potentially license to prevent about 1,200 to 1,500 persons annually to seek California licensure to continue absent those regulatory changes. So there was concern about the implementation date. We have heard from the ASPPB board that they are, as Dr. Turner mentioned, that they're considering that, but absent at this point in time any clear indication that there is a delay of implementation, that is what we are currently facing as a board. And I think finally, as the last theme that emerged from the task force was a shared concern that the Association of State and Provincial Psychology Boards has really overstepped its bounds in demanding members to adopt the second portion of the EPPP without adequate consultation with its members and with a gross sector of stakeholders. There was a general consensus that it was treading into the regulatory roles that member states, including this board, exercises, and that the ASPPB is embarking on a dangerous precedent of a non-governmental entity based outside of our state with no accountability or oversight to Californians, establishing de facto policy for the state just by rushing the implementation. So that was a general sense and emotion and feeling of the task force, and I would be remiss if I didn't include and mention it as a part of this conversation. The conversations finally presume that we're in this quandary of needing to make adjustments potentially to existing law to implement the EPPP2, but also some of the task force members felt that they missed a discussion about the alternative to what happens if we do not adopt the EPPP2. Additionally, there was some conversation about a fail-safe mechanism that would give this board flexibility to go forward with another exam that might be able to address this concern. And so as a follow-up to the task force recommendation, board staff reached out to other DCA boards. Of the 12 board responses, one board had a general statutory authority to have an equivalent examination. which we as a Board of Psychology currently already have in Section 2942. And additionally, the board consulted with legal counsel about the legal necessity of fail-safe language, and that review determined that it was unnecessary. Finally, just to conclude my remarks, mindful of our time, I want to draw the board's attention to the minutes from the April 5th meeting of the task force on line 105, where it read, discussion ensued and a sentiment was reached that introducing a secondary portion to the examination was not in the best interest of California consumers of psychological services and prospective licensees, but that the alternative of the board abandoning the EPPP and creating its own general knowledge exam was not feasible or desirable due to potential issues with license portability. The EPPP2 task force adopted these minutes, including the above recapturing of our first meeting at our June meeting. So to conclude, the task force has raised serious concerns about the implementation of the EPPP2, and I'm happy to answer any questions from the board about the task force. Oh, public comment?
Thank you. Excellent. Thank you.
That's an accurate reflection of the...
Okay, well, let me give you a little roadmap for where we're going to go in terms of this whole thing. Tomorrow there'll be a discussion on the part of the board as to whether we are going to adopt the EPPP2 at this point, and if so, what implementation steps would be necessary in order to do that. That doesn't mean it's going to go in one direction or the other, but that will be the way that the discussion goes. So actually tomorrow we'll resume on, I don't know if we need to resume on item number 10 or go to 16.
10.
So we'll resume on item number 10. We want to get additional stakeholder comment, and there were some people that could only attend on Thursday. And then we'll make some kind of initial determination of where we're going in terms of the EPPP2. And then should we choose to move forward with it, we'll also talk about potential implementation steps. And then, again, we'll get back to some of the questions that are being raised by the task force. So I think that's it for today. Okay. See you later. Wow. Starting at 9 tomorrow morning.